Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to a very special session. It's always special to join on a Saturday, but today we actually have been leading up on our social media with a big announcement that we wanted to make. People who receive the weekly email probably already know a little bit about what I'm going to talk about, but I'm gonna take a little bit of liberty to give a little bit of a lecture today. So a little bit more than an introduction, not really, but I'll try not to take too much time. So, and I'm going a little old school, so I've got a little board here to help me. So we have a very special announcement. It's something that has been in the works for a long time, and let me start by saying what the announcement is, because it's a little bit different. The intellectual revolution has the potential to begin. That's the announcement. That's the theme of my talk today, and I want to start by putting that out there, and then starting with a little bit of history, because I wanted to share. We're going to do a little bit of book talking, a little bit of history today. So, you know, we've been doing this now for 20, almost 30 years in the world of books, in the world of education and learning. And our journey started, back in, well, we met in 1995. As far as book journeys are concerned, our book journey started with one of the Sheikh's first publications. This is called The Authoritative and Authoritarian in Islamic Discourses. Some of you may know this book. It's known as sort of the Orange Book. It was published by MVI, which is a part of Islamic Center of Southern California. And this was a long time ago. This was before the Sheikh had his PhD from Princeton. He was getting his PhD. He had finished all of his work. He was just writing his dissertation. And we were involved. We had, recently gotten married, and there was this big to-do in the Muslim community. The basketball player Abdul Rauf refused to stand for the national anthem one night when he was playing a basketball game, and this became a huge outroar because he claimed that, according to Islam, this would be wrong for him to stand up to the national anthem. And that triggered then a whole bunch of people coming out of the woodwork and issuing fatwas, doctors, engineers, all kinds of people throwing around hadith that, supposedly were the mic drop moment about why this was either true or not true. So it was a very interesting case study, and the Sheikh took the opportunity to write just a little treatise. You can see it's really tiny and, minimal. Talking about this case study. Now, he wasn't there to, say whether it was right or wrong, but what was really offensive is how people would just, what he called hadith hurl. They would hurl hadiths around and then make Islamic pronouncements based on that. So he used that as a case study and that whole dynamic of what happened to talk about how do you actually deal with Islamic studies in a proper way. And this term, the authoritative versus authoritarian, was used to, describe what can be considered authoritative versus authoritarian. And as a side note, it's very interesting because before this book came out, no one ever used those terms, authoritative and authoritarian. But then shortly after, it became part of our regular vernacular. People would say, well, that's authoritative or not authoritative. But anyway, it started with this book. It started with a Muslim publisher. And this book was not, it's like sort of typical of what we have come to associate with Muslim presses, which is not super high quality, like literally the way that it was published. You read it once and it would fall apart. And if you look at, the cover is not particularly beautiful. Orange is not a particularly, exciting color. And if you look at the insides in terms of how, it's laid out, it's, it's not very professional. It's not on par with what you would get when you go to a bookstore and you consider buying a real book. So this was the first go at it. And despite the fact that it didn't look beautiful, it surprisingly made a lot of rounds. And the content was so powerful that people bought it, fell in love with it. We met students years later who would come and, like when we were at Texas many years later and did a book signing for a different book, people would come up with their orange copies, completely dog-eared, completely highlighted, falling apart, and they would come and say, I love this book, and I carry it around with me everywhere. And so it was amazing just the power of the content despite the presentation. Because this book was really valuable, and the content was really valuable, we decided to take another couple tries with Muslim publishers, because it's a Muslim, it's a Muslim issue, and it's not something that can easily be published within a secular world. So this was take two, brown cover. This was Dar Taiba. I believe they were out of maybe Jordan. Risala. Okay, well, anyway, another country. And so it, again, not super beautiful. When you open it up, it's the same kind of thing. It's like got that feel. You know, all people who've seen, you know, all Muslims know this look, right? We have a lot of Muslim pamphlets, a lot of, you just know the minute you see it what you're getting. And, you know, we even had like, you know, a friend design this cover. But so, okay, you know, it was better. At least it didn't fall apart after you read it one time. So that was, so this was 1996. This one was 1997. This survived for a little bit. And then ultimately, Take Three, another Muslim publisher, 2002. Is slightly better. The quality of the cover is a little bit better. The inside is laid out a little bit better. But again, it's not to the standard of what you would expect a typical high-quality professional book. So, okay. So that was 2002 that came out. Now,
this was done without even getting our permission.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Oh, okay. I thought that was, oh, this was, okay.
Sadawi. Who's
Sadawi.
Who's Sadawi?
I thought it was, that's not Khalid? That's Khalid, right?
That's Khalid.
Okay.
That's not Khalid.
All right. So maybe it was done without permission. Well, we were happy because it was an improvement, but it was still like not great. Okay. So, okay. So at that time, you know, like Muslim publishers in general, you know, like I brought a few examples. You know, Amana was a big publisher at the time. So now we're like at the 2000 mark. And, you know, we were interested at this point, you know, we'd been involved with the Islamic Center of Southern California, and the Sheikh had been writing these articles in a column called Conference of the Books, and they were published in this magazine called the Minaret Magazine, which is around for many years, but it was a publication of the Islamic Center through their MVI, you know, publishing arm. And so this collection of really wonderful essays, which now you know are part of the book Conference of the Books, were not collected. They were just published. And actually when the Sheikh and I met, it's very interesting. We met in early 1995, and he had just completed the very first chapter of that whole collection, which starts out, you know, in a small apartment outside of Princeton, New Jersey. So that's where I come into the picture. And so by about the late 1999, 2000, we had a good critical mass, and we thought these are really valuable. It would be amazing to collect them together as a book and get it published. So I put together that manuscript, I collected the articles, I put together a marketing plan, and I decided, okay, I'm going to try and send it out to all the different Muslim publishers and see if we can get it published. And so, you know, I wrote, you know, like really nice kind of everything, whatever, you know, sent it out. And one after another, it was rejected. And I remember that at that time, the big publishers were Fons Vitae and, okay, so Amana. So this is an example of Amana. The cover, again, not beautiful. You open it up, and it, again, has that, sort of that same sort of ghettoized Muslim feel. The best in the class was Fons Vitae, which was this, which is, you know, it looks more professional, it looks more academic. They're still around today. Interestingly, Fons Vitae now is not just a Muslim publisher, but they do interfaith, so they actually publish books from other traditions, probably as a means to survive, I'm guessing. And then the other one that was what I would consider top of class was the Islamic Text Society, which looks like this, and they published a lot of books on Al-Ghazali, and they're still around. And so this was probably the closest. I mean, this to me is like on par with what you would get, you know, at an academic press. This is impressive, but they're out of the UK. But as far as the US, I think it was, you know, typical, like Amana and a few other publishers that I'm sure people know. So all of those guys said no to Conference of the Books. So we said, okay, you know what, I believe in this, and so we'll just do it ourselves. And so we got in contact. I was aware of a publisher that was an imprint of Rowman and Littlefield. They're called University Press of America. And this is a press that really existed for, you know, scholars who did really top-notch work. As I mentioned, maybe sometimes a bit esoteric. But you know, the work deserved to be published, but people just recognized that this is not going to make a lot of money. So it was an imprint that was dedicated to allowing scholars to publish their work, you know, with the expectation that, you know, they're not money making, but they're doing something good for scholarship. But they asked that you, in order to use their press, that you provide everything for them. So you had to go and get the text, copy edited, laid out on a page, camera ready. You go and you get the cover. You basically do all the parts. You are the, the work, the legwork. And then you deliver everything to them, and you write all the marketing copy and all that sort of stuff. And then they do the finishing bit of publishing it as a book. And then their distribution was minimal. They made it available on Rowman and Littlefield, but they were not actively marketing it beyond just the basics of putting it in their catalog. So thus the Conference of the Books was born. And I remember finding this image. I remember finding the designer to create the cover. I remember writing all the copy, and then finding the person to lay out the insides. And this was the first version of Conference of the Books. We really wanted to make it a beautiful book. So if every single chapter begins with, a lovely Arabic calligraphy. It's everything about it, looks professional. And it was really just a beautiful job. We made it in hardback, and then we also made it in paperback. And so, alhamdulillah, it was born. And this was the first version. So this lived so it came out in 2001. And this lived until the next version came out, which was in 2006. And this version actually, it was lovely because Rowman and Littlefield recognized that it was doing well, and they decided to republish it under their main title. So it's actually, this is now published by Rowman Littlefield itself, not Usuli Press of America. And so then this actually includes additional chapters that were written after the first one came out. So this has actually the complete set. And hopefully you guys have all read it because it's really amazing. So this process was really important for me from a learning perspective. And I found it, it was all new and really interesting, but I felt so relieved that we could actually create something beautiful. And the Sheikh had written another manuscript that I thought was just brilliant. Well, actually, it was the author, it was the content in this book, which is that whole case study. And I wanted him, by this time a lot of things had transpired. This text had been out for a while. People had been talking about it. He has a few, quotes and citations in there that were a little bit controversial about hijab and whatnot. So people were talking about it. And a lot of things had happened, and this was now post also 9/11. So, oh, sorry, no, not before this, but sorry, I'm getting my timeline off. It was not yet 9/11. But enough had happened that we felt it was a really good time for Sheikh to, republish the meat of the authoritative and authoritarian, and then add to it some commentary about what had happened since the first book was published. And so there was quite a lot to say. And so this book actually contains the total of this, plus commentary and some really interesting insights. And this is like kind of, and we did this through the same UPA process. So actually, if you read in the introduction, it's kind of nice. He actually says, oh, Grace kind of took it on and did it. And I just basically did the same thing here, got the cover design, got the image, did all the writing, and all of that, and then it came out. And it's such, and we've never really done marketing on this book, but it's been around since this came out 2001. So this came out in 2001, this came out in 2001. And it's survived, and it's made its way around, and it's been adopted in classes, and it's an incredible book because it's really like applied Sharia. And wonderfully speaking, the Sheikh just gave the keynote to the National Muslim Law Students Association a few weekends back, and they decided to buy this book and give it to all the people that are in their organization, which is really powerful because this is like what you need to know about Islamic law. And Islamic law is not the same as being a Muslim and then teaching Islamic law without training. So alhamdulillah, and you can see that they kind of have a nice, feel about them. Interestingly, so that was 2001. We had two other books that came out in 2001 because these things, when you work with a Muslim press, they take different time. There are different timelines, especially when you're working with a publishing company that's much larger. They have their own timelines and their own deadlines. And so interestingly, this was Rebellion and Violence in Islamic Law. Came out in 2001. This was actually Sheikh's dissertation, and this was published by Cambridge. So, and that came out in a hardback and a paperback. And I just want to point it out because, when you compare, once again, like best in class of a Muslim press versus, Cambridge, Oxford, you still see a significant difference. And then the last book that came out in 2001 was speaking in God's name, and this was published by One World Press out of the UK. And we, in both of these cases, we had really no input at all into the cover design. And so you can see that, this has kind of an interesting image and some Arabic. We had, I think, a little bit of maybe, we got to say like, okay, yeah, that's okay, we kind of like it, that's all right. But you kind of leave the design and the presentation of the book to someone who's not Muslim, and they may come up with something you like, or they may not. And now, actually, post 9/11, it becomes a little more risky because you've got the impact of Islamophobia.
This is an image of a woman teaching a class. It's from an Islamic tradition.
Awesome. I didn't know that. Actually, no, I did know that. Okay. So again, 2001. 2002, we had a couple of conversation books. One is The Place of Tolerance in Islam, which was a situation where the sheikh would write an article, and then then he was writing about tolerance, which was a big issue back in 2002. This was the Boston Review.
Where's the democracy book?
Yeah, I meant to grab it. I don't know if, can you go down and grab Islam and Challenge of Democracy? I was looking for the one with the right cover. It might not be on the shrine, but yeah, it's orange, and it's Princeton University Press. It came out around the same time. But it was another conversation book, again. So the sheikh would write the first article. That article would be sent out to a number of scholars who would then write their response to his article. And then the sheikh would read all of those responses and then write a final response in response to all of those other articles. And so it was a very interesting way to see scholars weigh in on this argument, on this issue of tolerance. And the same thing happened on the issue of democracy. So that was Islam and the Challenge of Democracy. So again, when this is like, I don't know if you can see this, but it's a bunch of women wearing white hijabs. This is presumably a Hajj, right?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. So it's a very, stereotypical kind of thing. When you think of Islam, oh yeah, of course you think of women wearing white hijabs, and not just one woman, but like a sea of women in white hijabs, right? So, and then I think the Islam and Democracy book was more, it wasn't people, but it was more like some other kind of design. So when Ramin brings it up, we'll take a look. This is another book that came out from a Muslim publisher, Shattered Illusions, where Sheikh actually has an article, but it's just another example of a Muslim press. It's better than most. It's Emil Press, which actually isn't even around anymore, but it was, a pretty good, a good presentation. And then 2005, after 9/11, this is The Great Theft. Came out in, again, after, this is a really important book. It was published by Harper San Francisco, and it was really the difference between, people were talking a lot about moderate Muslims, but yet no one had ever defined the term, well, what is a moderate Muslim? And so the sheikh wrote this book that really, the first part of it gives you sort of the history and the rise of, thank you, I know, see, this is not the one. This is the hardback, but it doesn't show you the cover. I couldn't find the other one, so maybe I'll show you another time.
I've never seen the hardback.
Oh, okay. So this was part one of this book, gives you the whole history of the rise of Wahhabism, and so you understand like why Islam is, or at that time was as crazy as it was with the infiltration of Wahhabi thought. And then the second part of it was really in a way it was the Sheikh's school of thought, but it was the difference between a moderate Muslim or an extremist Muslim and what he was defining as a moderate Muslim on all different aspects of theology and practice. And so it was a really valuable book that was adopted in a lot of classes. It's, the interesting history that I think I might have told about this is the first draft that was intended to be published for Great Theft was Reasoning with God. And he had written like a 400-page draft and handed it in to the people at Harper's, and they were like, what is this? We wanted a beach read. This is like so difficult. And then he, and he thought he was dubbing it down, but it was too difficult for them. So instead he then took that text back, and that sat for 10 years. And then he wrote this book in literally a month's time. So, and this was like to him the real dumbed down version, but for us mere mortals, it's an incredible book and a great education. So, but this again was a really important book after 9/11 to really indicate what are we talking about when we're talking about moderate Muslims? What does that look like? So, as I said, then this was 2006, and then came Reasoning with God, which was in 2014. So after this was turned down, the original draft was turned down by Harper's San Francisco. This sort of sat for 10 years. The Sheikh would work on it. Times changed. Islamophobia took an incredible rise. Some of the stuff that he had written that he thought was dumbed down, he went back and worked it back to what he felt was right. And for those of you who have read it, it's really like an intellectual autobiography. It's also really fascinating, deep insight into what has happened in the world of Islam, the perceptions of Sharia, and all of that in one person's lifetime. And it's an incredible it's an incredible journey because it's academic, it's personal, it's philosophical, it's beautiful, and so highly recommend that as well. And then the most recent under the Sheikh's name is this book, The Routledge Handbook of Islamic Law, which is a collection of articles. Sheikh has a really powerful article in here and an introduction, but it's an invitation to a lot of scholars to weigh in on different aspects of Islamic law. And so this came out, I think, in either 2020 or 2021. Oh, sorry, 2019. So that is kind of the history of like our interaction with the publishing world. And there was a lot of learning for me personally. All of this made me really feel like, oh my God, it would be really amazing for us to have our own press. Because when you're talking about, like Muslim presses and what they produce, you feel frustrated and you feel like, okay, I don't really want to work with a Muslim press because we want to be able to speak to the world and present ourselves in a respectable manner. And then this also creates a challenge because then you're working mostly with secular publishers. So the Cambridges, the Oxfords, all of these, big name publishers, they're obviously not necessarily interested in something that is grounded in the tradition and unapologetically Muslim. We're talking about academic presses. The Sheikh has written so much, he's said, he's done so much that is so valuable, and I always felt like, it would be amazing to have the ability to just create our own mechanism for publishing. In that time, obviously, as you know, the publishing world has completely changed. So, self-publishing has taken off. It's a lot easier to actually, create stuff. Over time, this was always just a dream that I had. And, as I had mentioned in my weekly email, as things progressed and we, created the Usuli Institute, and then we started doing virtual khutbahs and whatnot, we just had this critical mass of amazing information that, I felt shouldn't just live out there on YouTube or on SoundCloud, but that really needed to be published. So fast forward to 2019, and Usuli is now alive. We're doing halakas kind of on a monthly basis. We've been doing now khutbahs virtually since January of 2019. And Mr. Joe Linhoff sends me this beautiful email and says, I love your work and I would love to be able to help in any way that I can. And so we had several conversations, and I told him about this idea of publishing khutbahs. And he thought it was an amazing idea, and so he said, okay, well, I would love to do that. I'm a little busy, but I'm going to try and get, pass through what I need to do, and then I'm going to focus on this. So I was like, okay, wonderful. That would be fabulous. So, we got really busy with everything else. We got busy with Project Illumine and all of this kind of thing. And then one day, last Ramadan, Joe shows up and he's like, I've got a surprise for you. Here is the draft. And I was like, oh my God. So that was a year ago, this Ramadan. And then we were just excited to work on it. And, I think we decided, okay, let's make it happen. So this is my learning part of the page. Okay. So we then decided, okay, let's make it happen. Let's create Usuli Press. And let's think about what we want the first book to come out as. And so this is the announcement, Prophet's Pulpit. This is the collection of 22 of Sheikh's khutbahs, which are stunning. We spent a lot of time thinking about, what did we want to present in the first book, because this is the first book out the door. And if we want to prove ourselves as the Usuli Institute, as Usuli Press, it's got to be really good if it's going to go out there. It can't be, like something like this. And we really wanted to create something that was beautiful, that someone would pick up and say, wow, that that's really beautiful. That looks like a professional book. And then when you open it, again, it's beautiful, and you'll recognize we took the same approach of having these like Arabic calligraphy at the start of every chapter. We took a lot of time to think about, okay, what did we want to include? And because Sheikh obviously talks about a lot of different themes through his khutbahs, and so our themes were from darkness to light, on love and building a relationship with God, keeping our faith in the modern day, on justice, and on gratitude and navigating hardship. So these are sort of the bigger themes. And then within that, we've got, 3 to 5 khutbahs that are really powerhouse khutbahs. So if you've obviously sat through one of the khutbahs here, you know that Sheikh calls it as he sees it. He has no problem speaking truth to power. He talks about what's happening in the world. It's, what I called applied Islamic ethics. It's vibrant Islam. It's like what Islam is meant to be if you are an ethical Muslim that cares about this faith and cares more than just about prayer and ritual, but wanting to make a change for good in the world. I mean, it's one thing to have all of this incredible content available on YouTube video, but we all know that the vast majority of people have a hard time watching a 5-minute excerpt, much less sitting down and watching a 1, 2, 3 hour session. But those of us who have sat through those sessions, we know how valuable those are. And even most of Sheikh's khutbahs are an hour, give or take. So the fact that now we actually have it in a book is the fact that it's in a different form means that you have a different way of accessing this information. You can read it, you can gift it, you can read it again and again, you can take your time, you can study it, you can look things up, and it's a completely different experience. And I have to say that this book is so special. Joe did an amazing job. When you open this, it's a really difficult thing to listen to someone speak, have that transcribed, because this is our process. We send everything to professional transcribers and we end up with a raw transcript. And so you see someone speaking, but to turn that raw transcript into something that you can read and that moves you and where you still hear the voice of the person speaking, that is an art form. And that was something that Joe really honed in on, and he just knocked it out of the park. So when you open this and you read it, not only does it's clear, it's crisp, it's beautiful, but you hear the voice of Sheikh. And I think that's what's incredibly powerful. So kudos to Joe. Kudos to Joe's team, because Joe, as you know, is the head of he's the editor-in-chief of our Project Illumine transcription team. This is the crew that is getting us on the road to publishing the entire tafsir. So that's another process. We every halaqah that we have, we send it to the raw, to the transcribers. We get the raw transcription. Joe's team takes that raw transcription, works with it to clean it up and to get it a really good first pass, so that by the time we reach our, inshallah, 114th surah, then we have we've got a good first draft of all the other things that came before. It would have been way too daunting if we didn't, start that editing process until we were done with the halaqahs. Then you would have 114 chapters, and it would kill you. So Joe has done an amazing job with a team of, I think, 7 or 8 transcribers. And again, I have to just give my, absolute kudos to this transcription team. These guys are hardworking, they're dedicated. They're not even here in person. They're located all around, whether it's the world, around the US. They're, connected to us, but they have spent countless hours, working through a process. Joe has, a very clear vision for how, what process to follow, both in terms of how we handle the text and how we preserve what the Sheikh is saying. How do you preserve that voice? So the fact that they were able to get, keep up the work and give Joe a little bit of time to focus on this is huge. Now, this book was really intended for several different things. One, it's one out the gate, so it's now proof of Usuli. Okay, what are you guys really about? What are you able to produce? And it was a learning curve for us in preparation for this incredible tafsir that we want to take on. And it was trying to create a process so that when we have other things that we're ready to publish, that we have it ready to go on a dime. So we already have volume 2 and volume 3 in the works, because we have a whole inventory of amazing khutbahs. We are working on a few other projects that will come out over time, but it's a really exciting thing. What's really What I want to talk about today, though, I mean, it's like, I wanted to give you the history and I wanted to tell you how we arrived here, but I also wanted to talk about how, to me, this is so much more than just a publication of a book, because this book becomes a symbol and, and proof for what we are able to accomplish as Muslims when we talk about, an intellectual revolution. So let me go on to here. Okay. So, in terms, there's a lot of learning that, over the last 20, 30 years through this whole process that has really come together in finally arriving at the Prophet's pulpit. First, obviously, is that sadly Muslim presses are the worst. I mean, they just really are. There's just no two ways about it in terms of the quality of output, in terms of the professionalism in dealing with writers, the aesthetics, even the content. And I think anyone who's picked up a Muslim book, unfortunately, knows that for the vast majority, with a few exceptions at the top of class, that as a group of people, Muslim presses are sadly the worst. And in terms of even speed to market, most are not peer reviewed. They just are not up to snuff and not competitive with the mainstream. I mean, that's really the bottom line. And secondly, secular presses have the quality, but they don't have necessarily the conviction, right? So you're not going to necessarily, you can't publish necessarily something like Conference of the Books or the Prophet's Pulpit, a bunch of like sermons. It's going to be hard, especially in this age of Islamophobia. And really interesting, as a side note, I was mentioning, in part of like categorizing this book, like there's a lot that goes into like telling, your publisher, okay, what kind of book is this? Does it fall into religion? Does it fall into ethics? Does it fall into Islam? And you learn that there are these categories that you can choose from. Interestingly, there is a category for religion, sermons, and then subcategory Christian and Jewish, but zero for Islamic sermons. So this is like kind of the first thing. That was very interesting. And, I learned a lot also working with secular designers because, first of all, whether you have an opportunity or not to weigh in really depends on your relationship with the publisher and even just an individual, whether they're going to allow you to weigh in. So for Reasoning with God, for example, I was the one who was able to find this imagery, and then they allowed, us to present that imagery, and then they worked with the final form. So you see, like, or in some cases you have like no input at all, or like this, no input at all. So of course you've got a whole bunch of men standing there praying, kind of a very typical image. We didn't really like this image, but we really didn't have a whole lot to say about it. And even the title, The Great Theft, that was their title and not one that we necessarily really liked. But it was capturing what was happening at the moment, in an Islamophobic world, people wondering what's happening with, extremism. So, it was a really interesting learning because your experiences with secular presses, while they have the ability to create quality product, it's going to be a little bit hit or miss when it comes to like what you're trying to convey as a Muslim and as an unapologetic Muslim. And then lastly, like when you walk into the bookstore, like this is my constant pet peeve. We would all often go to the bookstore like every weekend. And now if you walk into a Barnes & Noble or any bookstore, go and see what is the Islam section. What does it look like? It's really, really depressing. I've taken pictures, I've posted on social media. The Barnes & Noble here in Columbus, Ohio, which is typical of many Barnes & Nobles we've been to, even in LA. You walk in and you've got rows and rows of Christianity, Catholicism, Judaism, and the Islamic section is literally no more than that, one shelf. And consistently, it can consist of this much in terms of the Quran. You might have like 3 different Qurans, and then I've seen Reza Aslan's No God But God, and then the rest is Islamophobia, Hershey, Ali. And it's you will have some, combination of that. And for the second largest religion in the world that has issues about Islam and all of that, this is ridiculous. But what it conveys is one that Muslims don't buy books. They don't spend money on books, and this is not a source of income for people who publish and sell books. And so they will put out there what people will buy. And so, and then in terms of like quality, well, okay, if I have to choose between, these, I'm going to choose books that on Islam that come out from presses that look professional. And, and those a lot of times are not the best books for guiding seekers and, for representing Islam as it should be. So what ends up happening in terms of all of these dynamics, poor quality books, poor quality publications, lack of financial investment, consequences are that Muslims don't control their narrative. As we know, Muslim voices are not heard. Their issues are, not clear to people. There's no means of educating common people, anyone who even is interested in Islam. It's very difficult for them to find books or to know what books are good. And that Muslims ultimately wield no financial power in this backdrop. There are no high quality books or very few quality books, and that others, like Islamophobes, will control the narrative. And then as far as Muslim presses, there's no respect from fellow publishers. The whole Muslim publishing space becomes very ghettoized, and there are no consistent quality standards. Now, we know from our work here that the jihad of our day and age is ideas and knowledge and communication. And so that is why it is extremely important. Like this book and this publication and Usuli Press represents so much more. So to sum it up, when you try and take a look at what are the elements of success of a good book, content is, of course, extremely important. The cover, how it presents, is it beautiful? Is it appealing? Is it something that you want to pick up and look at? For our purposes, conviction. What does it say about our faith? Or is it apologetic or is it not apologetic? And ultimately, distribution. Is it going to get around? And when you look down this level, so I've got Muslim publishers, secular publishers, and Usuli. For Muslims, we don't always know that the content is very good. Most times, often, it's not. A lot of it was very Wahhabi for very long. The cover is obviously not great. Conviction is there, sure. Distribution, I don't know. I mean, maybe just ghettoized and among Muslims, it might be okay. Secular, they've got the content. They've got the cover. But they don't have the conviction necessarily, and they definitely have the distribution. For Usuli Press, with the Prophet's Pulpit, we have definitely the content. It's amazing if you read it. It's incredible. The cover, I honestly think it's a beautiful cover. We obviously have the conviction. And, just to say, like, how do I define, like a high-quality book? In terms of Muslim terms, it's, obviously it has to be aesthetically pleasing, that it's got to be rigorously sound, and unapologetically Muslim. Because a lot of Muslim books, although they might be really good, they're very apologetic. So, the last question then is distribution. And that is really then what brings me to now I'm going to be a little bit convert zeal-y, and so forgive me if I go a little nuts because, this is we talk so much here about who controls the narrative, how do we make a change? I am so sick and tired and done with people thinking Muslims are backwards and stupid and can't be on par with mainstream. We absolutely can do this, and this book, to me, is proof of that. I wanted to be able to compete with other academic presses. I can go forward and say, what's in this book is empowerment. This is empowerment in a book. It's, speaking truth to power. Everything that Sheikh says about, the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and, the backwardsness of Muslim, spaces here in America. It's all here. We didn't edit any of that out. It's applied Islamic ethics. It's Quranic exegesis. It's what we do here. It's what is God's book telling us to do? And how do we do it? Right? So every single week, Sheikh gets up and talks about what's happening in the world. And he tells us, if you're an ethical Muslim, this is what you should feel. Yes, we live in dark times, but this is what, if you as an individual, it's up to your individual choice. This is how we make the change. If God feels that we are willing in our hearts to, do the right thing and stand up to justice, then God will help. But until we get there, we're going to be in darkness. And what I love about what we do here that is, I think, different than a lot of other Muslim, scholars, presses, organizations, is we focus not just on the trees. I think a lot of people get lost in the trees and they don't see the forest for the trees. So, I question, like, who has a real comprehensive view. Like, I'm on social media, I look at books and things. People are having debates about hadith. People are having debates about, this tradition, that approach, that school of thought, blah, blah, blah. It's like all tree stuff. You're missing the forest. And I feel like what we provide here, what Sheikh provides to us, is truly, when you talk about a way forward, a methodology, an applied way of living. And that's what people are looking for. Even like a Yaqeen Institute, I was looking at some of their stuff, and their approach is, we come up with good questions that are interesting and important, and we ask scholars to weigh in on these questions, and then we make it easy for you to access. So you can look at infographics, you can, approach it through this, that, the other thing. But it's not a methodology. It's not a way forward. It's not a comprehensive view. If you don't know up from down or right, then answering one or two questions is not going to get you a way forward. But that's what this does. And that's, and so the fact that now, if we are a press and we can control the quality of content, and Usuli content is second to none, we have a great cover, we have conviction, and we are not apologetic. We are not, we know our job is to testify and, speak truth to power. All that's left is distribution. And what I ask, so now we're available on Amazon, alhamdulillah, right about an hour or two before the sadaqah, the hardback went live. So you can get the paperback now. The hardback is, you can order it. We have an ebook in process. And then we also are working with distributors, so it'll be available, hopefully, in brick and mortar stores, so in Barnes and Noble and whatnot. And I'm praying and hoping that that some of these bookstores will pick it up. But what makes a difference is now all of you. So we've done the hard work of creating this incredible product and making it available. And now what I ask all of you is to join this cause, and if you're done with looking, with Muslims being thought of as stupid and backwards, join me. And let me just share with you. So if anyone's familiar with this book by Malcolm Gladwell called The Tipping Point, or there's another book called Contagious. These are books that talk about the dynamic of how ideas take hold, how they become contagious, how they get set on fire. Things come to a tipping point, and once they get past the tipping point, poof, they explode. And that's what I want for this book, because this book is now, to me, best in class. If you can find a book that's better than this, show me, I want to see it. But that's great, I hope so. But from where we're sitting, this is the best book from that quality standard. Unapologetically Muslim, beautiful inside and out. So now, this is a symbol that you can share with your friends, your non-Muslim friends, your Muslim friends who don't understand what the heck you're doing, or why people should care about Usuli, or why Hamza Yusuf isn't, good enough, or why Omar Suleiman isn't good enough. Here it is. Use this as your Eid present. Give it to every single person you know, and I don't care if they read it. I just want them to see it. I just want them to know that it exists. I just want them to know that somebody is doing something that can be taken seriously. And interestingly, we talk a lot about, where is the change going to come? And it's really interesting. Professor Sahar Aziz came and spoke in Dr. Abul Fadl's Muslims, Race and Law class this week. And it became really clear to me when she was talking about her family. She came from Egypt. Her parents came, and like so many families, they were looking for a better life. And but she made this comment, my parents said, we are not here to change the problems in America. If we wanted to change things, we would have stayed back home and fixed things there, because they consider themselves guests in America. And so they are not interested in issues of racism or, gender issues or wealth and, disparities or any of the social justice issues, because they feel like they're guests here. So who are the people that care? They're the people that are probably second and third generation. And oftentimes we know people who reach the third generation are not really Muslim anymore. They're the ones that say, yeah, my parents were Muslim, but they don't have the language, but they feel that America is their home, and they're the ones that actually can make the change. So when we talk about who are the Muslims that are smart, that care, that are social justice oriented, that are curious about the Quran, probably everyone in this room, is 2 degrees of separation from everyone in America or in the West who falls into that category. So between us, if we can get this book in the hands of every Muslim academic, influencer, activist, anyone who cares, we can start to hopefully get to that tipping point and try and make a change. So all I ask is just buy a book for your friends, and give it away. Just make it, tell them to put it on their coffee table. It's so pretty. You could frame it. I don't care. You don't have to read it. Just get it out there so that it makes an impact, so people see it. Their awareness rises. And then that can be the start of change. And I really believe that if we want to make a difference, this is a great first step. And inshallah, may God accept and help us. That's what makes, so many things don't make it to the tipping point. They don't catch fire. And that's where I feel like if we take the effort and God sees it, then God can push it over the tipping point. And that can start to make things change very, very quickly. And if that is the case, instead of having the potential to begin, we can then say the intellectual revolution has begun. Like, on a personal note, I thought I would share this. A lot of people here have heard my story about, my family, my conversion, how my parents and I were, when I was really estranged from them for 8 years, and how difficult it was. So one of the very first things that I did when this book came online and was available to buy, like literally just this week, like several days ago, I bought 2 copies, one for my mom and my dad. And they got it actually even before we did here, so just the way that the distribution worked. And so I called my mom, and I'm like, okay, I'm sending you a gift today. Did you get it? She's like, oh yeah, we got it. We got it like a couple hours ago. We've been reading it. I'm like, oh, you didn't call me. But I'm like, okay, what do you think? And she said, your father said to me, I can't believe we have a daughter that could do this. We've done nothing. Maybe our only purpose was to have a daughter that could actually do this. And then he wrote me a text message a couple nights ago, and he said, I think what you and Khaled have done is absolutely amazing. I don't think anyone else could have done it. And he's like, how many more volumes are coming out? When are the next ones coming out? If you know anything about my story, years ago when I converted, I literally thought I would never, it's like I was done. Like my parents, disowned me. I, was ready to just see them on the final day, and then this is like a Ramadan miracle. This is a Ramadan miracle. Usuli Press is a Ramadan miracle. And then to get a message like that from my parents is truly a miracle. And so anything, can change very quickly. And I think that if we put in the work, the change can come from here. Because I just don't see that the content that's out there doesn't compare to the stuff we do here. Other Muslims are not interested in figuring out what the Quran has to say. And this is just dovetails with all the work we're doing with the halaqas. How can you be Muslim if you don't know what your book says? And how can you know what your book says unless you've had someone like a scholar who's dedicated his life opening the meaning, and then we're here just to receive it. It's such a miracle. So thank you for giving me all of this time to take you through some history and my musings and kind of go off on my convert zeal. I really appreciate it. But again, please join this cause. Let's make a difference. Let's get to that tipping point. Let's get this book to everyone. We can, get it to, if you know people who can write reviews, if you know people who want to endorse it, anyone. Like, there are just a million ways. Let's get it into the hands of politicians. Interfaith groups, Muslim artists. I'm going to reach out to Rami and I'm going to say, Rami, get this to all of your friends. Everybody who wants to care about Islam, who wants to be Muslim, wants to find comfort and faith and direction and justice and something much better than this darkness in this world. This is the way. So let's do it. Thank you. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي يا رب. So I just to to continue the flow, of course, every time you stop, there is a certain flow that is interrupted. The, we talked about the unmistakable tendency to take Surah Al-Mujadilah, as people has often done with the Quran in general, broadly speaking, as engaging, it was a surah sort of engaging in things that are distinct, separate, and apart. That there's, the issue of the jidal, a woman with a problem encountering, going to the Prophet ﷺ, complaining to God, God then revealing a response. Then there is a sort of a distinct, separate, and apart problem of the what the Quran describes as the najwa engaged in by the hypocrites of Medina, or I mean, the term hypocrites, unfortunately, is very broad, and it what you discover is that it incorporates and it includes, unless unpacked and interrogated and sifted through, that it includes a very broad array of individuals, either individuals who were systematic dissenters, meaning that they individuals who were not really Muslim, individuals who were in fact thought of themselves as in fact Muslim, but they were weak in faith, individuals who were not necessarily devious and not necessarily weak in faith, but weak in character, who engage in behavior that is problematic and unethical because of the weakness of their character. Anyway, so the tendency is to then see this as, okay, well, there's this issue of jidal, this issue, or the issue of the woman, and then the issue of those individuals who are talking, gossiping about the Prophet and his followers, and that they are engaging in this gossip with the Jews of Medina. So they're gossiping with the and that this gossip is causing a great deal of anxiety and turmoil in society. And then to say, well, and then there's a sort of separate and apart problem of sort of as often described in so many sources, the social ethics of al-majalis, or the social ethics of how to conduct yourself when you sit in public gatherings. And to then say, well, okay, it's saying that, and in fact, different people have taken a different way. So some have, said what it's saying is that just make space for people to sit. Some in the Islamic tradition have interestingly taken it in a direction that I find very problematic, and that is when you organize your social gatherings, be cognizant of the status of people and who belongs where. So one of the things I remember a long time ago. This was, I think, in the days of Sadat in Egypt, Anwar Sadat. There was a guy who asked um, one of our teachers about the fact that, and you find this all over the Arab world, probably all over the Muslim world, my guess, but is that, whenever you go to any events, you always find the first rows are reserved for dignitaries, and there is a whole social, I don't know, a sense of prestige and envy, and a whole social dynamic that goes with, oh, who gets to sit in the front rows and who can never sit in the front rows. Interestingly, when I visited at Yale Law School, this was the only place in the U.S. Where I actually found that they followed this archaic and medieval sort of system that you normally encounter in third world countries. That there is a faculty, the faculty that are considered the most prestigious in the law school, that sit in the front, and it doesn't matter how late they come, their seats are always reserved. And so some and so the when the fellow was asking about why in the days of Anwar Sadat, I mean, it's, of course, he just happened to be asking when Anwar Sadat was president, but it is the case till now. Whether it's Islamic that the awliyat al-qawm, the elite, always have their seats reserved at the very front. And never forget, the Sheikh cited this verse to say, well, and what he meant by citing this verse is he was claiming what you find in the sources, that the occasion for revelation was that some of the Badriyun, some of the early Muslims who had took part in the Battle of Badr, arrived late to the meeting and found that people had not reserved seats for them, and that bothered the Prophet ﷺ. And the claim is that then this verse is revealed to say you guys should have basically made space for the nobility, the noble in status. I mention this because don't get the misimpression that the interpretation that you hear from me is the interpretation that you will necessarily encounter in all the books. And don't be surprised if you're somewhere and someone says, no, this ayah was revealed to say that you should know the status of people, and make space according to their status. I believe this is completely misguided, and I believe this is completely wrong, and I believe that this arises from the highly segmented and fabricated way that we read Surah. And we don't understand the morality and the ethical message of the surah. And in the fragmented and segregated way of reading things, then you would go on and say, okay, so after it talks about sort of the ethics of social gatherings, making space either for latecomers or making space for dignitaries or whatever, then Surah Al-Mujadilah moves on to talk about those who are hostile to Allah and His Prophet, man yuhadidillah, those who are sworn enemies, and so on. Now, of course, by doing that, which is normally the approach, not just to Surah Al-Mujadilah, as I keep underscoring, but there is something uh, um, Surah Al-Mujadalah itself, as is the thrust of so much of the Quran, um, underscores honesty and transparency in discourse. And I've noticed something. It's you find this among Muslims, but I'll tell you, it's not just Muslims. It is in all. I like the term defeated cultures, or all defeated societies, but you could replace, instead of defeated, you could say in all societies where illiteracy is high, or societies where the level of education is seriously wanting. Let's put it that way, or societies that are underdeveloped, and that is it is part of the lack of seriousness with the intellectual process, and that is lack of lack of honesty in even diagnosing the problems in discursive or discursive processes. And what I mean more specifically is that you have this tendency, like, something will be in the tradition, and you encounter it, we all encounter it in the tradition, and we've encountered it for decades and decades and decades, and we all know that the people could have grown up with exactly what I'm describing. That, the tendency to take a surah as basically an amalgamation of rulings and so on. And then you come along and you say something like, well, each surah has a coherence and a cohesiveness and so on. And then, because of the lack of seriousness in confronting our problems, there is a tendency that you find that is immediate in for people that hear you to pretend like, well, yeah, sure. Well, what you're saying is that has always been known. It's been like that, and the problem is when you pretend that something is not, or that something, or you pretend that something is that it is not. You marginalize and trivialize the intellectual point. You trivialize it because by pretending something is that is not, you guarantee that it will only survive for a very short period of time. For as long as, when the next person comes along that goes back to the original sources, who might have not actually heard it from you, but heard it from someone who heard it from you, and say, this view is clearly discredited because the original sources clearly don't uphold this view. Honesty in discourse is to say, no, we know what the original source is from the very beginning, and to say what is actually a when something is when something is separating, or something is what is the word I'm looking for, breaking, not breaking away, but launching from a breakaway point, because it is a continuation of a tradition to an extent, but it is also a departure from the tradition. So I'm emphasizing this because in Surah Al-Mujadilah, one of the surah in the Quran where you see this very distinct, that I've never read. Now, again, they always learn in scholarship and in knowledge that just because you haven't encountered it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It could exist, but I just haven't encountered it. But in my readings, I have never encountered someone or encountered anyone that has even given the idea that Surah Al-Mujadilah has a cohesive flow to it, who has taken that seriously. But I submit to you that, in fact, if you don't understand the cohesive flow, if you don't understand that this is not about separate, desperate occasions for revelations and about different things in different points at different moments in time, that in fact you will not understand what Surah Al-Mujadilah is about at all. So Surah Al-Mujadilah, I think it underscores the importance of Allah. The Quran is not a digest, and Allah is not a digest writer. It's not, Allah is not compiling a bunch of events under a general heading. And if you take many of the riwayat, so for instance, in Surah Al-Mujadilah, when you read Ibn Mas'ud, who says the first 10 ayahs are Meccan and the rest of the surah is Medinan, or another tradition that will another report that will tell you, oh yeah, Surah Al-Mujadilah was, all Surah Al-Mujadilah was revealed in the 5th century Hijrah, except for this one ayah that was revealed in the 10th century Hijrah. A lot of these reports, that when you go back and you study these narratives that sort of do tanasub, they think that this verse seems to fit that this occasion, and these reports appear as opinions by tabi'in, and then eventually they are reported as hadith attributed to the Prophet ﷺ. It's a highly problematic picture, because then what the impression you get is as if Allah has written a digest. It's each surah have events, but they're not even chronologically organized. It's not even that the events are, the reason, the unity is that the events occurred around the same time or consecutively, but then you sit there and you say, well, so why is a surah, right? Why this event is placed under, and this is precisely what people like Gibb and Watt and many of the Orientalists of the Quran had a field day with, is to say, well, look, the Quran doesn't even have subject unity, doesn't have chronological unity, The Quran is an amalgamation of just collection of reports, and it opens up, it's an endless array of. While if you in, I would argue that if you actually invest a modest amount of effort, you will discover that there is a cohesive and a comprehensive unity, thematic unity, to all the surah. And I'm underscoring this with Surah Al-Mujadilah because Surah Al-Mujadilah is perhaps one of the surah that is, you find it's sort of on a spectrum. It is the extreme where you find commentators finding no semblance of unity. Okay. But as we were saying last halaqah, that what realities, what truth, while in Surah Al-Qasas, Allah alerted us to the importance of qasas in our lives. Qasas creates realities. People tell themselves all types of qasas all the time and tell others qasas all the time. And it is the qasas that often gives us what we look at as our history and our past, our narrative. Surah Al-Mujadilah, but comes back to this issue, but from a different angle. Because now it is not the mega narratives, but it is the specific acts of speech that you engage in, and how speech can injure society, or how speech can render society, create illnesses within society, or speech can have a very different purpose. It is not a speech that focuses on the satisfaction of personal idiosyncrasies. So much of the speech that we could engage in, unlike this, the woman who challenges the vain speech of zihar by taking her speech to the Prophet ﷺ, and then ultimately lifting her speech to Allah. And because revelation ends, Allah provided a solution to this woman. But when revelation ends and Allah is no longer directly intervening, what, as we will see, if we in fact fail to replicate this process of having when the act of appeal to the divine be a meaningful act in the tangible manifestations of life among people. In other words, if we render the representation of divinity on this earth that when people appeal to God and they find that the way that the divine manifests in their life through human agency, through, to be more specific, through the agency of law, is either non-responsive or unjust or unreal, it is as if the woman of the Har appealed to God and God allowed the Zihar to stand without a solution. This is a very serious responsibility and a very serious charge. But it requires that we all know that Zihar is a lie. And we all know that Zihar is not just a lie, but it is unjust and unfair. And not just unjust and unfair, but it is degrading and insulting to the woman. Allah solved this woman's problem but what happens when revelation ends and other people are situated like this woman in situations where they suffer injustice or they suffer indignity, and they raise their hands to Allah and complain about the injustice and complain about the indignity, and those who are supposed to be khulafa fil ard provide no solutions. That's a very, very serious problem, and it would reorient your whole attitude towards Allah, because it is not about just following nusus. The essence of the nas, I mean, you are following the nas, but it is not following the simple superficial zahir al-nas. You are delving into the very objective of the nas, and you are satisfying the moral education and the moral trajectory and the moral norms of the nas. So, because this is a critical point, underscore it a different way. The fact that you come and say, well, if I have a case of zihar, I will listen to what the Quran says. You haven't discharged anything. There is no more zihar in our day and age, but that's neither here nor there. It is the dynamics, it is the discursive process that is important. That you pay attention to the fact that zihar is a lie, zihar is an indignity, zihar is a humiliation, zihar is an injustice. A woman suffered all of that. She went to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet said, I don't know. Allah resolved the solution by giving us Surah Mujadilah in its entirety. Not solve the solution by saying, don't do zihar anymore. Solve the solution by giving us Surah Mujadilah. And that is the lesson that you get. That is the lesson in legal hermeneutics and legal philosophy that you learn. Leave alone ethical philosophy as well. And that we go from there to the point, while the contrary to modern Arabic usage, that the jidal is actually good. But a najwa, and the najwa that is mina shaitan, that is from shaitan, is a serious problem. Now, how do we know najwa that is from shaitan? Well, Allah tells us najwa from shaitan, it is any speech, unlike speech that diagnoses a problem and tries to solve a problem. If the speech that you engage in is for idwan, ithm and idwan, you are gossiping, you are slandering people, you are bybacking people, that's the ithm. And idwan is to spread enmity and anger. It's not that you want to solve anything. It's not that you want to address an injustice, because a lot of Muslims, even till today, even in our day and age, because of how poor our educational processes are, they're very confused. They come before an injustice and they think, Wallah Azim, I've seen this even with youth all the time. You will find them gossiping about their friends and engaging in ghaiba, clear ghaiba. And then when they suffer an injustice, they think that their Islamic obligation is to not to speak about it, because speaking about it would be haram. They've got it completely flipped on its head. It's twisted. What Surah Mujadilah is telling us what we should know intuitively. That when it is about addressing an injustice in order to find a solution, you're not even speaking about an injustice for idwan, to just create enmity and hostility and to spread hate. That is najwa min ash-shaytan. That is demonic najwa. And that is what it is. Not that you are a munafiq, and because you are a munafiq, you engage in the najwa min ash-shaytan. But the fact that you engage in najwa min ash-shaytan turns you into a munafiq. And this is again important, because the way we teach Surah Al-Mujadilah, among others, is that you find people who think, well, since I am a good Muslim, whatever najwa I engage in is necessarily good. Again, you flipped it on its head. We know whether you're good or not by the consequences of your actions, or your actions, not by your status. It's not that your status that defines the moral quality of your actions. It is rather the moral quality of your action that defines your status. So regardless of who you claim you are, regardless of how much you pray, how much you fast, how much you read Quran, if you engage in najwa of an ithm wal idwan, there are people that can't help it. That's how they find themselves, is to always create drama. That's what they live for. If they don't have drama, they're bored. They don't find themselves, and that makes you into a munafiq. You are a munafiq. It's not. Speech is no small thing. Allah created existence through speech. Speech is what creates in our created world. Speech forms our physical, engages and interacts with our physical universe. and has a direct bearing on whether we live in the godly or we live in the demonic. This is precisely why how you speak to your parents, how do you speak to your spouse, how do you speak to your children is very important, because you are either weaving the demonic or weaving the divine in the way you speak. If you say, well, yeah, I have a divine marriage, and or yeah, I welcome God in my marriage, but when you get upset, you see red, and you say things that have nothing to do with being divine, regardless of how much you, regardless of what qasas you tell yourself, the truth of the matter is, foul talk makes the divine leave and the demonic settle. And it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter, you are opening pathways and spaces for the demonic. This is why it is very important to fully understand and appreciate what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us when Allah says, إذا قيل لكم تفسحوا في المجالس فافسحوا يفسح الله لكم وإذا قيل لكم انشذوا. Now notice here, and this is where we left off, that and I talked about al-ifsah and al-nushuz in last halaqah, but this thing that did, when it comes, we talk about what's missing in the tradition and we talk about what actually exists in the tradition. And what this part in the tradition, like the quote from Al-Razi that I read last time, what does exist is that many commentators notice that this is not just about making space in. So that's one, and I've read the quote from Razi last time. But this continuation of, Allah says that Allah's normative command about al-ifsah wa al-nushuz. Al-ifsah wa al-nushuz. When Allah continues on to say يرفع الله الذين آمنوا منكم والذين أوتوا العلم درجات. So, okay, so first let's see how Muhammad Asad translates it. Maybe this. So when you are told make room for one another in your collective life, this is Muhammad Asad's translation. Make room, and God and in return, God will make room for you in God's grace. And whenever you are told rise up, now I like the way Muhammad Asad translated this. He took nushuz as rise up for a good deed. Do rise up, and God exalted. Do rise up. Period. Okay, and then Muhammad Asad continues, and God will exalt by many degrees those of you who have attained to faith, and above all, such as have been vouchsafed true knowledge. So, one is al-ifsah, what Muhammad Asad translates as make room in your life, And in Nushuz, what Muhammad Asad translate as rise up to perform good deeds. Now, it is a symbiotic relationship that in order, if you want to be elevated by degrees, if you want your knowledge to matter, if you want your piety and knowledge to actually produce concrete results in elevation, in an irtiqa. I gave a long time ago a lecture at the Islamic Center of Southern California about irtiqa in the Islamic tradition. I hope it's available because you don't normally hear people talk about irtiqa in the Islamic tradition, but it's very important. But you need to understand these core values. And you need to understand how these core values are related precisely to the Mujadilah at the very beginning and to النجوى أن النجوى من الشيطان والنجوى من الله, the demonic najwa and the divine najwa. So, and I want to, I know that I touched upon this last halaqah, but I want to underscore this material because of how critical and critically important it is. So first, تفسحوا في المجالس. Make room. Now, of course, Muhammad Asad translates it and make room in your life. And of course, if someone wanted to, pick, be picky with him. If someone wanted to challenge him, someone would say, well, "Wait a minute, how could you say life when it says majalis? Majalis is a majlis, right?" And so the myopic people would say, "Well, it clearly says makes peace in a majlis." And a majlis is a sitting. Something where you sit, not a life. But I suspect, because I know that Muhammad Asad did his homework, even when he didn't always explain what he was saying, but I suspect that, although let me make sure before saying it. I'm pretty sure that I've never read him explain.
He does explain it.
Huh?
He does explain it, I think, footnote 18. He agrees with
Okay, yeah. So, although it is frequently assumed that this refers to the assemblies held by the Prophet when his followers would throng, so he says, the better to hear what he had to say, or more generally to congregation and mosques. I am with Radi of the opinion that the plural noun majalis is used here in a tropical or metaphorical sense, denoting the totality of men's social life. Okay, yeah, he does. Taken in this sense, the making room for one another implies a mutual providing of opportunities for a decent life to all, and especially to the needy or handicapped and members of the community. Yeah. What I would underscore here is the idea of social life, because a majlis is not just where you sit, but it is what, ironically, what the fellow who co-opted a lot of the Islamic traditions, like Rousseau in his idea of social contract, the idea of the assembly. And majalis is where people are assembled. And where people are assembled, this is the context where you have the social interaction and the critical importance of whether people feel included, whether the dynamics are inclusive or the dynamics are exclusionary. Very much like the woman who had the Mujadilah. She had a problem. If the Prophet would have told her, I don't have a solution for you, go away. What is the place of this woman in the assemblies of life and in the social dynamics of life, what becomes the idea of the social contract eventually, and so on and so forth? It is one of exclusion and non-incorporation, because you don't feel dignified, you have a problem, society didn't respond to your problem, so society made no effort to include you. But if, in order for there to be a dynamic of inclusiveness, what the Quran refers to as a tafassuh, your whole attitude must be that in our assemblies, we can't have, or it is immoral to have the type of discourses that spread ithm and idwan, and that is the problem with the najwa shaitaniyah, and that while we can't shut people up, because ultimately the Prophet ﷺ at no point said, well, the solution is to take these people and throw them in jail, or the solution is that to exile these people of Medina. That's not the point. The point is with the morality that you are charged with. But at the level of your formal assemblies, and this is where politics and law and public institutions come together, you are absolutely under a moral norm of inclusivity, rather exclusion. And in order to have inclusivity means you have to be responsive to people and their problems. The second thing is in nushuz. And in nushuz, I agree with Muhammad Asad, it is rise up to good deeds, but in nushuz is not just, it is, in nushuz is qila lakum unshuzu, means, it's like saying, get moving. It is precisely like saying, don't be lethargic when it comes to telling you what is needed for moral inclusiveness, for inclusivity, for being socially responsive to people's problem. The opposite of a nushuz is to say, it's not my problem. Is to say, as long as I take care of me and my family, and we do our prayers well and our psalm well, and we keep our doors closed and our windows closed and have nothing to do with anyone, we're fine. That's exactly the opposite of a nushuz. A nushuz is dynamism. A nushuz is to say, if someone has a problem in society, this is my problem. So, now, note here, Allah comes and says, if this is your attitude, if you are a socially responsive people, immorally responsive people, then your iman and your ilm will elevate you many degrees. But if you're not, you could have iman, you could even have ilm, and not be elevated at all. This is the response. Surah Al-Mujadilah, remember, this is in Medina. The Prophet ﷺ and his al-Bayt and his companions have a world of headaches. External enemies, internal dissenters, people who are wishy-washy, people who are hypocrites, people who are traitors. What the Quran is teaching is, in order to have any chance of meeting your challenges, you've got to rise up. Why? This is in response to all those people who turn Islam today into a the same thing I was talking about on the khutbah yesterday. Those who tell you, I am above politics, and what they're really saying is, I am above justice, or I am beyond politics, I'm beyond justice, which effectively is saying I'm beyond the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, I'm beyond the Prophet, I'm beyond. Islam to me is all about a what is the word I'm looking for? An ego trip. It's about putting on, acting, and putting on the right pretenses, acting, putting on the right tonality when I speak. Putting in a show of religiosity. But the Islam that took the world by storm, the Islam that changed the way the poor, the dispossessed, the displaced live their lives, the Islam that built a civilization, they have nothing to do with that. So, and the thing that blows your mind is when these people pretend to be following the Sunnah. What Sunnah? I mean, it is, like you say, I want to honor my father. Okay, so, and then instead of walking in the footsteps of your father by, being the charitable man that he was, or being the educated man that he was, or being the kind man or the generous man, I see you sitting there, putting on red socks. And I say, why are you putting on red socks? I say, well, I'm honoring my father. But your whole character has nothing to do with your father. The only way you're honoring your father is putting on red socks because once you saw your father put on red socks. That's these people's concept of the Sunnah. It is the most qusur, it is the most superficial. What was the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? The Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ was to change the world. And change the world for the better, not for the worse. Not for more oppression, not for more injustice, not for more unhappiness, not for more any of the ethical norms that we recognize. It is to increase morality, not decrease morality. You will find in some sources, and you'll find in a number of sources or a lot of sources, that they will tell you that they take it the opposite way. They say that if you have iman and if you have ilm, then you will engage in ifsah al-majalis and in nushuz. I don't think it works grammatically. If you know Arabic, revisit it, reread it, and see for yourself. It doesn't work grammatically. And as a consequence, when you do read these commentaries that say that, they become very convoluted because they know that, and they often do the thing of jumping from giving you the verse, giving you the argument that doesn't work with the grammar of the verse, and then moving from there to citing a hadith about fadl al-ilm and fadl al-ulama, and then from this drawing the conclusion that it must be that because of fadl al-ulama, the fadl that the ulama have, that it must be that the ulama would be able to do a tafassuh wa nushuz. There are many illogical steps in this. If you studied logic and you try to map up the logic of this argument, you'll see that it doesn't work. Okay. What time is it? يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا ناجيتم الرسول فقدموا بين يدي نجواكم صدقة ذلك خير لكم وأطهر فإن لم تجدوا فإن الله غفور رحيم أشفقتم أن تقدموا بين يدي نجواكم صدقات فإذا لم تفعلوا وطاب الله عليكم فأقيموا الصلاة وأتوا الزكاة وأطيعوا الله ورسوله والله خبير بما تعملون. This is now 12 and 13. So Muhammad Asad translates it as, believers, whenever you intend to consult the Prophet, offer up something in charity on occasion of your consultation. This will be for your own good and more conducive to your inner purity. If you are unable to do so, know that verily God is much forgiving, a dispenser of grace. Do you perchance fear lest you may be sinning if you cannot offer up anything in charity on occasion of your consultation with the apostle? But if you fail to do it for lack of opportunity, and God turns unto you in God's mercy, remain but constant in prayer and render no more than the purifying dues. And thus pay heed unto God and God's apostle, for God is fully aware of all that you do. Okay, so the traditions that you normally get or that you often read with this part of Surah Mujadilah is the argument that of an abrogated rule. And what you read in many sources is that people used to crowd around the Prophet ﷺ, constantly asking him questions, and that used to exhaust him, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then tells believers, okay, from now on, if you want to ask the Prophet a question, you have to pay a sadaqah. And of course, those of you who cannot do it because they can't afford to, Allah forgives them. And also at the same time telling them, if you fail to do it because of the lack of opportunity, or you just, the circumstances doesn't permit it, then then make your prayer and your worship a replacement for that. That, okay, you didn't get a chance to pay a sadaqah when you asked the Prophet about this issue, but then do worship, prayer, salah, and psalm, and so on instead. And then you get reports. There's a whole just canvas of them that some say. I don't. Did I write it down? Yeah. Some say that this was a ruling that was the law for effect for one night and then it was abrogated. Others say that it was the law for 1 hour and then it was abrogated. Some say that it was 10 nights for 10 nights and then it was abrogated. That if you ask the Prophet, then pay. Not pay the Prophet, but pay a sadaqah. And there's even, it entered into sectarian issues where there's a very famous tradition attributed to Imam Ali, that Imam Ali says there is one law in the Quran which was followed by no Muslim except for me. And that's this verse, that when it was decreed that Imam Ali radiallahu anh would never ask the Prophet without paying a sadaqah, but no one else did. No one else followed that law. That it was a consistently violated law. It's a long story, and a long journey, but this narrative about Imam Ali and this ayah is a good example where you find, in terms of chain of transmission, and I'm even talking about Sunni chains of transmissions, not Shia chains of transmission, but Sunni chains of transmission, it looks solid. But when you analyze the hadith historically, it looks highly sectarian. That it was employed, it was employed in sectarian and it's even though it's in Sunni sources as well as Shia sources, but that the Nawasib did everything they can to try to suppress this tradition. The anti-Nawasib did everything they can. They try to protect this tradition. We read vague references that that someone says from the Muhaddithun that a version of this tradition used to exist was a different isnad, but this isnad has been suppressed and we have no evidence or no athar of what that isnad was. Anyway, so I don't confuse you and risk losing you. I have very serious reservations and qualms about this entire this was decreed for 1 hour and then abrogated. This was decreed for 10 days and was abrogated. This was decreed for one night, was abrogated, and so on. And I think nothing was abrogated. But what it is saying is entirely consistent with the message of Al-Mujadilah, and entirely consistent with the morality of Surah Al-Mujadilah. And that is, there are many of you that compete to speak to the Prophet. And that, to put it in our terms today, talk is cheap. Talk is very cheap. People go to the Prophet ﷺ not just with questions. ناجيتم الرسول. It doesn't say إذا استفتيتم الرسول or سألتم الرسول. ناجيتم الرسول. That many of you are more than happy to, I want to engage you. It's like you see people today, every, what is that expression? Joe, Matt, and Harry, or
Tom, Dick, and Harry. Tom, Dick, and Harry.
so there's no Joe?
Average Joe.
Oh, and no Matt? Okay. Tom, Dick, and Harry. No Joe, no Matt. So, every Tom, Dick, and Harry, the attitude towards talk is, when you take talk for granted and you take your attitude towards ilm itself, and that is why one of the most fascinating things is that the whole enterprise of ilm, when and this is something, unfortunately, that has been lost in our Islamic tradition, that to show reverence for ilm, you had to spend money on ilm. The idea that you're entitled to ilm for nothing, the ilm comes free, is a very post-colonial / Wahhabi idea. It is a hodgepodge of the cheapening of Islamic knowledge. And note, by the way, mind you, you want to, a lot of times, instead of giving you a lecture that was 3 hours long about Muslim Islamic history since the 17th century onwards, I'll just give you a very simple example that will make it click. Take any of the colonized people that you know. Egypt, Syria, Tunisia, whatever, Iran. The idea that you have to spend money to learn medicine hardly needs proof. In fact, it is somewhat insulting to say, try to get medical knowledge or the time of a doctor for free. The same attitude doesn't at all exist when it comes to what we quote unquote qualify as Islamic knowledge, philosophical knowledge, social knowledge. Compare that, if you want to just even get a clue, read The Rise of Colleges by George Maqdisi, a book in English, Rise of Colleges in Islam. And see the extent to which the Islamic civilization understood that unless you put your money where your mouth is, talk is cheap. And what the Quran is simply saying is, all of you guys, there are a lot of you that come and talk. But the proof that any of this talk actually means anything is your sadaqat. This is not going in the Prophet's pocket, obviously, but it is if you are sitting there and picking his brain, as so many, every Tom, Dick, and Harry like to do, the number of people that send you emails, in our day and age, say, I would love to pick your brain. Okay, fine, I'll allow you to pick my brain, but pay for it. They'll disappear in a second. It is unbecoming, not it's unbecoming towards you. It is an insult at you to even aspire for ilm without it having to cost you. If you want ilm as a matter of cleansing your own soul, make it cost you. It Because it is a form of riyada nafsiyya, it is a form of disciplining the soul. Allah is teaching us, look, you can have a woman that comes with a complaint, and you could send this woman away without a solution. And the result is you have no inclusivity and you have complete apathy in your society. And because of that, your iman and ilm doesn't elevate you. You're dead in the water. Alternatively, you have a very different attitude towards creating problems. Now, at the same time, look at, there is speech that is focused on diagnosing a problem, finding a solution to a problem. And there is a speech that does nothing. It camouflages, or it pretends to be, or it what is the word I'm looking for? It's a word like camouflages, but when you pretend to be something that you're not. Mimics. It mimics like diagnostic speech, but it's not. It's all about spreading enmity and stroking the ego, entertaining your own ego, or addressing your own insecurities or your own sense of inferiority. You feel insecure, so you like to talk about people and talk about all the faults, the people's faults, because you are an insecure person. That's stroking the ego. Now, the amazing thing is that when you learn to put value on speech, that, well, I don't have time for cheap talk. I have only time for talk that does good, or offers something, or elevates, and my attitude towards ilm is a serious attitude. I put my money where my mouth is, because we all know that our real shaitan that causes the greatest shirk is our money. The real shaitan that causes the greatest shirk is money. So Allah comes in and cuts, just through all the thicket and says, okay, you want, fight the shayateen of najwa by sadaqat. Cleanse the shayateen. Allah warned us about the najwa min ash-shaytan. And fight the demons of najwa. How? Through your sadaqat. No abrogation, none of this nonsense about, it was an hour, it's not. And in fact, when you look at the narratives, I can point to, I've found several narratives where the companions of the Prophet ﷺ would tell him that, this person is just a talker, because he's miserly and he never never pays sadaqah, never helps anyone in society. So in other words, they're telling the Prophet ﷺ, don't waste time with him. Surah in Mujadilah, as we'll see in a second, itself refers to this. When the hypocrites call the Prophet ﷺ an udhun. An udhun means he gives his ear to everyone. Everyone can talk into his ear. And this is a way of trying to deprecate him, is that he is lightweight. Anyone can influence him, and anyone can. And of course, they're completely off. Of course, it's insulting, but the point is that it is not the case, or the point is that it is who you choose, who you know is worth giving time to, is itself a test of your own character. What time is it? Is it time? Okay. We'll break fast and pray Maghrib, inshallah. 10 minutes. Don't go away. We'll be back. We'll just break fast and pray Maghrib and come back, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Next movement in Surah Al-Mujadilah, Allah alerts us to those who اتخذوا أيمانهم جنة, which really, subhanAllah, it really, the Quran, tadabbur Quran, studying the Quran carefully, gives you a very layered picture of the challenges that the Prophet ﷺ and his ummah confronted. A picture that is quite different from the popularized historical narratives. So it is clear that at the that this society confronted a challenge by segments in society that chose to go with the trend. They knew that Yathrib had become Medina. They knew that the majority has decided to stand by the Muhajirun from Mecca. The majority has decided to stand with the Prophet ﷺ. And they, as we've discussed already from Surah An-Nisa, they were keenly aware of the transformations that this creed was not like the forms of religiosity that had become anchored in society at the time. The religiosity that had become anchored in society, including Christian and Jewish and other forms of religiosity, subhanAllah, in many ways resemble the forms of religiosity that exists in the modern age. It is a non-intrusive religion, in the sense that the religion affirmed social stratifications, and the social stratifications drew strength from the religion. the religion of people revolved around the promotion of the egotistical endeavors of the individual. What you performed rituals in order to improve your chances of better trade or better objective in lively endeavors. Even in Judaism, the idea of the afterlife by the time of the Prophet ﷺ had weakened quite a bit, and in some Jewish sects had even completely disappeared. That the idea of Hayat al-Dunya being the only thing, and without heaven or hell. And in Christianity, all of religion had become summed up and monopolized within the institution of the church, and acts a salvational creed that you accept Jesus Christ, you do what the church told you, and that's it. But the church itself it had there was no social transformations, there was no program of social justice or any form of, and it is not an exaggeration. I mean, if Muslims were not colonized and they were writing their own history, it would become very obvious to them that by the time that Allah brings Islam to the world, Islam is the only reminder or the hearkening back of religion as a social agenda, as something that transforms, that engages and wrestles with justice on this earth for the hereafter. Okay. So, and we talked about the whole segments of the population in Medina that chose to say they're Muslim, to take the Shahada. Even some of them performed rituals. You know, they would show up for prayer, whether consistently or inconsistently. Some of them would pay the zakah, but not beyond the zakah. And some of them would, as we talked about, socialize with those who are not with the program, particularly the Jewish tribes. So, note, ألم تر إلى الذين تولوا قوما غضب الله عليهم وما هم منكم ولا منهم ويحلفون على الكذب وهم يعلمون. So, let's see, 14. Are you not aware of those who would be friends with people whom God has condemned? They are neither of you nor of those who utterly reject the truth, and so they swear to a falsehood, and while they know it to be false. And the hilfan here, the swearing, is that they consistently tell Muslims, when Muslims ask them about their suspicious behavior and what appears to be their divided loyalties and their, it's in our modern age, because the Quran addresses all ages, and you must always read the Quran with an eye towards the age in which you live. Those people that you look at, and for me, when those who you find their position towards something like the Aqsa Mosque, their position towards something like the plight of Muslims around the world, the Uyghur Muslims, their position towards Kashmir, their positions towards the genocide that threatens millions of Muslims in India, their position towards Muslims in the Rohingya, their positions toward the Muslim ban, their position towards Islamophobes and the Islamophobia and the Trump administration, their position towards Islamophobia in the West, their position towards the banning the hijab in France, the position towards banning the hijab in India, the position towards a whole set of things. And when you confront them, their response is to swear to you, to assure you that they are with you. They are fully Muslim. But Allah knows that they're liars. And Allah knows that they, in fact, do not adopt your causes. And they are not committed to your causes. But here, اتخذوا أيمانهم جنة فصدوا عن سبيل الله. Notice, their speech act, the way that they deploy speech is to take religion itself as a camouflage, as a way to hide their immorality. It is al-sudud an sabilillah that exposes the Jannah here. It is the fact that they do not pursue the path of God. They are not committed to Muslim causes. They are not committed to what any decent form of morality identifies as Muslim causes. In our day and age, I would put Al-Aqsa Mosque as center of this issue. I would put something like Islamophobia as center of this issue. For our day and age, when I find Muslims that minimize what Islamophobia does, or that try to persuade you that it's no big deal that there are, an Islamophobic president of the main superpower that exists in the world, it reminds me, right, that if these ayat weren't revealed to us to shed light about such situations like this, then I don't know what does. But anyway, اتخذوا أيمانهم جنة, that they in fact use their faith to camouflage their immorality. الصدود عن سبيل الله, that they take religion not to empower the moral path of God, but to, in fact, to obstruct the moral path. So, even from the very beginning, Allah is alerting us that religion can be used in ways that are diametrically at odds with the moral path. And that in the hereafter, they will, in the same, when Allah tells us that in the hereafter, يَوْمَ يَبْعَثُهُمُ اللَّهُ جَمِيعًا فَيَحْلُفُونَ لَهُ كَمَا يَحْلُفُونَ لَكُمْ. Okay, pause here for a second, in tadabbur. Pause for a second. Allah is telling us that when Allah resurrects them in the hereafter, they will swear to God as they just like they swear to you now. Pause for a second. The reaction of these people is that they will find themselves, upon resurrection in the hereafter, they will still swear to God and still assure God that they had no bad intentions, that they in fact were sincere, devout Muslims all along, just like they do with you in life on earth. What does that tell you? It tells you it is that self-deception can be so deep that the self-deceiving human being truly believes his own lies. I mean, they are in the hereafter, and when they know that God would know, but this is their truth. The corruption, it's like when the corruption has set in so deeply. So the fact that you see someone who seems to you like a very pious Muslim, as in the very day we live in, they seem like very pious Muslims. They do dhikr, they do whatever. But they come and tell you, oh, the Palestinians, we have nothing to do with the Palestinians. We have nothing to do with the Aqsa Mosque. We have nothing to do with, we shouldn't worry about the genocide that is happening, already happening, because every day that passes, there are lynching of Muslims in India, and there are sexual assaults of hundreds upon hundreds of Muslim women in India. I keep reading human rights reports, and they make you cry. Muslim world is completely silent. And the head of India, Modi, is welcome in every Muslim country. The man who, before he rose to power, is responsible for the murder of 5,000 Muslims, doesn't have a single Muslim country that even shuts its door to him. Leave alone the Uyghur, so when you find Muslims who appear to you like they're devout Muslims and you're confused by it, why are you confused by it? These are the same people who will appear in the hereafter truly believing that they're good Muslims. But they're not. Because why? Because saddu an sabilillah. They don't care about justice. They don't care about other Muslims. They don't care about what a sirat al-mustaqim is. It shouldn't confuse you. Okay. Now, and Allah sums it up to us. استحوذ عليهم الشيطان فأنساهم ذكر الله أولئك حزب الشيطان ألا إن حزب الشيطان هم الخاسرون. This is الاستحواذ الشيطاني. I better make sure I don't forget anything. I'll leave my notes. Okay. الاستحواذ الشيطاني الاستحواذ is, how do you put it? When there are people that could be استمالهم الشيطان, that people who the shaitan could attract them. Meaning the shaitan entices them and they still have enough wherewithal to sometimes resist and sometimes not resist. Al-istihwaz al-shaytani is when shaitan has managed to confuse you or to overtake you to the point that your very decisions all serve all flow in serving the objectives of shaitan while you think you are doing good. You no longer see wrong from right. I mean, listen, every now and then, and these are the worst and the most horrible and the most horrid of cases. I mean, every now and then I get someone who would contact me and tell me the following story. And unfortunately, it's happened too many times in that now they'll tell me that their parent, their father, it's usually a father or an uncle, rarely a brother, but it's usually a father or uncle, that they pray, they fast, they sometimes even they are a pillar of society. They're an imam in the mosque or at least on the board of an Islamic center. In other words, they're a medical doctor. They're quite, they're very respected in their profession, highly revered. Everyone respects them. But then, and it's not always, but most of them are women, although in some cases they were not women, they were men. They'll tell me that throughout their lives, their parent or their uncle or their older brother had consistently and systematically sexually abused them. Sometimes it's molestation, sometimes it goes much further away than molestation. When I was younger, and I would hear something like this, it used to say destroy me is not an exaggeration. How could it be? I just couldn't understand how could someone who prays 5 times a day, how could someone who fasts, how could someone who, and especially when I knew the person that they're talking about, show up, and even some of them give khutbahs, lead Jum'ah. I've sat in their khutab, and then I discovered that all along, that all these khutab that I sat and listened to, they were sexually assaulting their daughter. But the more you engage in tadabbur, engage in studying the Quran, you understand, istahwaza alayhim shaitan. They have achieved complete unity with the demonic. There's no separating barriers. Their religion itself has become a junnah, has become a form of deception. It doesn't just deceive you, it deceives them. The proof of someone's piety is in their moral conduct. You look at their sirat, you look at their sabilillah. Are they contributing to sabilillah? Are they committed to the sirat? That is the proof of their religiosity, not the rituals, not the displays of piety in public. The truth of that, only Allah knows the truth of that. What happens to you when I see you in prayer, what is between you and Allah, that's between you and Allah. But your moral conduct, that's my business. That's everyone's business. What you do to other human beings, so when Allah warns us that those individuals, that as we will see later, some of them will even go and establish masjid, what the Quran called Masjid al-Dirar later. But these people that Allah describes as istahwaz alayhim shaitan, where people that sometimes consistently prayed they showed up for prayer, they prayed jama'ah, they would go away, they would, some of them even took part in battle. If we do the Sira project, we'll come to know quite a few of them quite well. Participated in some of the famous battles. But Allah knows what the truth of their heart is, and the material proof is in moral conduct. The material proof shows when it comes to, are they committed to sabilillah or are they not committed to sabilillah? When it really matters, not when they engage in ostentatious displays of piety and get, good utility from it by being respected and regarded and praised and so on. That's a show. And the truth of that is between them and Allah. What I judge you on is your moral conduct. That's what I judge you on. So Allah told us that, and here there's this duality as well, that it is Allah informing us about the historical legacy of these people, that despite the fact that they are formally or part of the Muslim community, that the Prophet ﷺ didn't exile them, didn't imprison them, didn't punish them, that Allah didn't tell the Prophet to expel them or kick them or whatever. Nevertheless, because this is, you can't purify society of shaitan. You can take measures in society to as much as possible protect against shaitan, but you cannot adopt the idealistic and naive belief that because you have displays of piety, or that you force people, as Saudi Arabia used to do, force people to go to the mosque when the azan goes off or whatever, that somehow you're protecting yourself from shaitan. Shaitan is as the Prophet ﷺ says, it flows close to you like blood. I mean, it's part of, it's so intimate with human beings. So the duality that I speak of, so one is it's to tell us about these individuals, but second is to go back, and here is a normative warning as well, that if you are not careful, if you do not understand the dynamics of what reality speech creates, and that speech could be for diagnostic purposes and for moral purposes, as raising a problem and finding a solution to a problem, that if you don't value this type of speech and respond and be responsive to this type of speech, and people learn that there's no point in constructive speech because there is no constructive act that responds to constructive speech, and that people as a result then engage in a najwa shaitaniyya, in other words, in bitching and complaining. And what's the point if I learn that every time I have a legitimate complaint and I bring it to authorities, I'm quashed. No one listens to my complaint. No one cares about my complaint. What do you think is going to happen? What's going to happen is people will engage in najwa shaitaniyya. They will become like a beehive of rumors and gossip, and and that will in fact result ultimately in istihwaz al-shaytani. You will end up in the nest of shaitan, even if you don't want. And in fact, then your religion will become a form of Jannah. That you are using your religion as a label to hide your impiety and your immorality. Look at so many Muslim societies today. If sahf al-majalis, as we identified, is inclusiveness, you find that missing in so many Muslim societies. If an-nushuz is being proactive in moral causes, you find that missing in so many Muslim societies. If jidal for constructive purposes, you find that missing in so many Muslim societies. So many Muslim societies, if you have a constructive complaint because you want a constructive solution, you've in fact become the enemy of the people. If it is the role of gossip and conspiracy theories and this group hates this group and this class hates this class and this, you find that rampant in so many Muslim societies. What is the net effect? In so many Muslim societies, their Islam is nothing but a Jannah. Their Islam is a label that covers, that conceals a great deal of immorality. A lot of immorality concealed behind the Islamic label. What is that if it's not istihwaz al-shaytani? What is that if it's not that you have fallen trap to shaitan? Do you see? Okay. And then Allah reminds us here, إن الذين يحادون الله ورسوله أولئك في الأذلين. محادة الرسول, Allah والرسول, it's the same word that from which had is derived, right? Had is the limit, the boundary. So hudud are your boundaries. So territorial boundaries are called hudud dawliya. Why? Because they are the boundaries of the state. Al-hudud al-ilahiyya, although we often use that to refer to criminal penalties, but it is everything that is within the boundaries of the divine. Okay. الذين يحادون الله ورسوله. Those, although most of us here tell you that this means those who are hostile to Allah and the Prophet. Linguistically, it is not precisely that you are hostile, but it's even more than that. Those who fall away from the boundaries of Allah and the Prophet. Allah promises you, you either understand the lessons of the Quran, and instead of using Islam as a label, you actually live within the moral boundaries of Islam. But if you allow yourself to drift away from the boundaries of Islam, of Allah and His Prophet, your fate is fil adallin. Your fate is deprecation. And how does Muhammad Asad translate adallin?
Most abject. Most abject.
Say again?
Most abject.
Most abject. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Your fate is most abject. It's a complete deprecation. because as in 21, كتب الله لأغلبن أنا ورسلي إن الله قوي عزيز, that it's the same that العزة لله. Although we often read when we say كتب الله لأغلبن, they tell you that Allah is foretelling that it is in fact the Prophet. Or some commentators tell you that Allah is telling you that in the hereafter it is Allah and His prophets that will prevail. But it depends on how you define لأغلبن. How do you define victory? If I tell you, if you want victory, you live within hududillah, moral victory. It's like saying it is Allah's law. It is the law, it is the divine law included in nature itself, that those who follow Allah's morality will prevail. Prevail in what sense? Prevail morally. Will be the moral party. Prevail morally in this earth, and prevail morally in the hereafter as well. Okay. Now, then Allah takes you to even the heart of the matter. First, historically, 22, which says that there are people who ally themselves with their fathers, with their children, with their siblings, or their tribe. When all said and done, they care more about their family, their tribe, their clan, more than they care about Allah and the Prophet. And for those people, it is as if Allah is telling you that you cannot be Hizbullah, you cannot be the party of God, if in fact your moral vision is that your morality, your sense of right and wrong comes from your blood, your tribal affiliations, your national affiliations, rather than Allah's revelation and this Quran and the Prophet ﷺ. Historically, you often, in this context and in the context of this ayah, in tafsir they'll tell you that Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah, or Abu Ubaidah Jarrah, killed his father in battle in Badr. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, also in Badr, I believe killed his son, or fought with his son. Mus'ab ibn Umair, in Uhud, killed his brother. Umar ibn Khattab fought with and killed his uncle, and I believe in his cousin as well in Badr. Who else? Ali bin Abi Talib, several members of his clan and his cousins, several of them in both Badr and Uhud, So, in other words, in the tafsir, they always, tell you, look, there are these individuals who, when they met their own blood in battle, they were so committed to the cause that they fought till the end, etc., etc. And you could, and the way that this ayah is often approached is to tell you what it's talking about are those who were not similarly committed, like Omar or Abu Bakr or Ali or Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah or Mus'ab bin Umair or etc. etc. In other words, they but there is again, while yes, I don't doubt, considering that everyone was related to everyone in these societies, and considering that it was not at all unusual in these societies that if you violated the code of honor of the family or the tribe, that your family or your tribe would turn against you and would be determined to liquidate you. And that's why in Badr and Uhud, the relatives of these people thought them out and considered it an personal obligation upon themselves to kill them. So, I can't erase the dishonor that has fallen upon my family when my son converted to Islam, unless I kill my son. And so the reason but to simply reduce it to these historical dynamics, I think again misses the point, because most the reality of most Muslims, listen to these stories, and they think that, oh, in order to be an Abu Bakr or to be an Umar or to be an Ali, that uh, uh, you must declare your father or your brother or whatever an enemy if they don't follow the real Islam. It's not. This is not what it is. It is taught. It is in the context of al-munajah and al-jidal, and in this entire context that ultimately, لا تجد قوما يؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر يوادون من حاد الله ورسوله. And we said, من حاد الله ورسوله, those who have obtained their moral being, their moral standards, their moral path, not from Allah and the Prophet, but from outside the boundaries of Allah and the Prophet. So it comes and says, if you don't want to end in Hizb al-Shaitan, understand that in the same way that Shaitan has his party, Allah has his party. There's Hizbullah and there's Hizb Shaitan. Hizbullah is not about using speech to spread al-ithm wal-adwan. It is not about creating societies that exclude others or degrade or demean others. It is not about societies that are morally inactive or that do not care about vindicating the rights of human beings. Hizbullah is about what is embodied in this Quran itself. Now, you stand at a juncture. It's the same concept that you find in the authoritative and the authoritarian. The central idea of deference. all of us, in the way we navigate our lives, minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, we are constantly deciding who to defer to and who not to defer to. Deference is who do you choose to believe, who do you choose, notice here, choose to believe, choose to listen to, choose to be inspired by, all constructions of reality through speech or acts of speech or speech acts, which is constantly constructing realities around you. Who do you decide to defer to? Who do you decide not to defer to? Who do you decide to give the benefit of doubt to? Who do you decide not to give the benefit of doubt to? Who do you decide to believe? Who do you decide to disbelieve? And we are constantly engaging in these acts of deference. Now, when you engage in acts of deference, you are either, all of us engage in these acts, none of us are autonomous, independent actors, as much as we like to believe we are. We are always, our acts of deference are shaped by psychological influences and intellectual influences upon us. What are your psychological and what are your intellectual influences? If your intellectual influences are positions of principle in which you make the conscious decision, I am determined, I am committing myself, I am vowing myself, I am promising myself to hudud Allah, to the God, the sovereignty of God, to the jurisdiction of God, i.e., to the moral principles of God. Otherwise, there are many people that will say Islam as a junnah, as a label, as a sticker. But in reality, everything that shapes what they defer to and not defer to is their father, as the Quran says, their father, their children, their siblings, their clan. Ultimately, when you look at them, you see the predominant influence upon them, and the deciding factor upon them is their family and their clan. This is why converts especially pose an opportunity. Of course, a lot of converts, unfortunately, they show a great deal of autonomy and voluntarism. Voluntarism meaning independence when they convert, but then they end up deferring. They end up replicating, sort of adopting a new family and deferring to this family in a very clannish way after their conversion. But let's assume that they don't do that. Converts often, because they come to Islam not because they're simply following a father, a brother, a clan, and so on. They have a great deal of promise of being Hizbullah, of, in fact, because it's all a matter of conscientious decision making, and that conscientious decision making, in the same way they make the determination to be with Allah, Allah makes a determination to be with them. And in the same way that you find a lot of people who are born into the faith, what they're accustomed to is really to simply imitate whatever so their system of deference is based on the assumption that Islam or Allah and His Prophet are embodied and fully represented in their family members or in their clans. And because of that assumption, they simply follow whatever their family members and their clan is. And no further ado. Immoral path, in the same way that Allah comes and anchors this issue and says, النشوز والإفساح is a morally conscientious act. You are not deferring to your clan and your family is by its nature contra to al-ifsah wa nushuz. Deference to family and clannishness is its natural gravitation is towards exclusion, not inclusion. And its natural gravitation is towards apathy, not action. Do you see? It all feeds in one loop after the other. There is an amazing coherence in Surah Al-Mujadilah that so many people cite as the example of disjointedness. Indeed, it is a prime example of cohesiveness in the Quran. Indeed, now, final point. Look, the very fact of Al-Mujadilah, the woman who rebelled against the Har and went to the Prophet ﷺ and argued with the Prophet ﷺ and complained to Allah, and Allah used her as an excuse to change the entire law. It is because she was the type of woman not to defer to inherited cultures and habits. If she had the mental, like so many other women, and we have numerous reports about the practice of lihar before the revolution of the surah and even after. Most women, okay, lihar is lihar, okay, I know, and they defer to culture. But this one woman that rebelled and took the matter all the way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and induced a response from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a moral exemplar of precisely how to be part of Hizbullah and how to avoid being Hizbul Shaitan. It requires moral strength, moral courage. It requires action. It requires that you understand that Allah, when we are khulafa'ullah fil ard, we have an obligation to confront problems and solve problems. Not simply say, well, problems don't exist because we don't find it in our textbooks. Last thing, I nearly forgot this. Imam al-Thawri, in one of the traditions, he says that he's talking about his time, and he says that the early Ar-Ra'il al-Awwal, he's talking about his time and earlier generations, and he says that the early Muslims took Ayah 22, and again, just so I'll read the translation so everyone is with me. It says, you will not find people who truly believe in God and the last day. At the same time, Muhammad Asad says, love anyone who contends against God and God's apostle, even though they be their fathers, their sons, or their brothers, or their kindred, um, or their kindred. Um, it says yuadun. Yuadun is to be amenable to and influenced by. It's not necessarily love. Okay. Anyway, so that Imam Tawri says that the earlier generations took verse 22 in Surah Al-Mujadilah, and they applied it to nazalat fi sultan, meaning that they applied it to their relations to power. And he even says that Abdul Aziz bin Rawad, that Abdul Aziz bin Rawad, at the time of Al Khalifa al Mansur, got a message from Al Khalifa al Mansur that Al Mansur is demanding that Ibn Rawad Ibn Rawad is one of the early jurists of Islam. Anyway, that Al Mansur said wanted Ibn Rawad to appear before him. I don't know what business he wanted with him, but anyway, and Ibn Rawad escapes. He leaves town and hits the road. So Al Mansur says, find him and bring him to me. And then when they bring Ibn Rawad, and Thawri reports that Ibn Rawad then recited this verse in Surah Al-Mujadilah to tell Al-Mansur, Allah has warned us, that he's taking this ayah to mean that Allah has warned us not to get too close to those in power. إنها نزلت في السلطان. That now, of course, I can see the connection in that if the choice is either, if the sultan is unjust, and at least if you fill in all the blanks, it's what it's saying is, if the sultan is unjust, if it's a mulk adud, as instead of a khilafa, it's a secular type, not even secular, but even immoral, unjust power, that you have to choose either the path of Allah and the Prophet, or being friendly and amenable to those in power. Here it would be your ashira, and that this ayah was employed in the ethics of staying away from the venues and halls of power. Of course, I think it's an interesting narrative. It's a part of our history and our intellectual legacy. But obviously, it is far more expansive than that. It is not just about not getting into bed with an unjust ruler. But you can't afford, if you want to be a part of Hizbullah, and not to be wittingly or unwittingly a part of Hizb al-Shaitan, you can't afford simply accepting the surrendering to moral habits rather than moral consciousness. You can't simply do something because it's your parents, it's your nationality, it's your tribe, it's whatever. To live a fully morally conscious life, it's like truly, I read someone saying that, in Islam, an absurd statement that in Islam that Muslims are never expected to live fully, to convert to Islam or to become real Muslims as if converting to their faith when they reach adulthood. A statement like that tells me that this person knows nothing about the Islamic tradition. In fact, everything about Islam demands that even if you're born into this faith, is you become a convert to this faith all over again and live a fully morally conscious life or conscientious life. Okay, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. This is Surah Al-Mujadilah. Tammat.
Alhamdulillah, this is my kind of surah. Converts rule, yes. Woo! Thank you. Honestly, like I think at the end, it just got me so excited because you've started my notes from last time, but this surah to me is like the epitome of the surah of empowerment, and it's so important. Even the story that this is a woman who comes to the prophet, and the power. I mean, empowerment for each individual, the power of speech, the power of each of us as individuals deciding. Even like when somebody says something to us that hurts our feelings or treats us wrong or misunderstands, that at that very moment we have a choice to make. We can respond in a way that will create kindness and goodness and understanding, or we can choose to respond in a way that just engenders, just sort of keeps that ill feeling going, and I can every day I'm in those situations. Everything that comes out of my mouth, I have to think about, how am I going to make this person feel? Am I saying something that will allow me to be in the party of God and not in the party of shaitan? And a lot of times, like one of the things we say around here is just don't help shaitan, whatever you do. And it's such a good like overall rule. I mean, it's interesting, like Google's thing is don't be evil. But, for us, it could be just as simple as whatever you say, whatever you do, don't help shaitan. And I feel like this surah is just so important for us understanding the dynamic of speech and our power through our own speech. The idea that words create realities, and just the beautiful idea when it all comes together at the end of what is a moral exemplar in our faith. I love that it's a woman in this story, that she is testifying to what's truthful. She is challenging. Obviously she has courage to stand up. She's taking action. She's challenging the status quo, which is a lot of times what we say we do here. She's resisting culture and inherited norms. Again, the idea of being a convert all over again, convert versus heritage Muslims. I get emails from, heritage Muslims who find us and say, I want to take this road. I want to convert. I want to know about what's the right path. And it's exactly what Sheikh said at the end. And then to just know that Allah is watching everything that you're saying and doing. And if you have that dynamism, if you have that action, that Allah will aid you. Or that, or that if you don't have the dynamism, and you then Allah may not. And that ultimately, we're testifying to truth and choosing Allah. It's so powerful. It's so beautiful. It's like, this was a really, really impactful surah, I think, for me and for many of us here. But just because it, again, underscores your own personal power.
There's a reading group that asked me what surah they should adopt.
Yes, this was it.
And I told them to adopt this one, right?
Right.
I don't know if this reading group is hearing.
They will eventually, because they watch after. They might maybe not hear right now.
I was sort of flattering them because by adopting the surah, that means I want them to be what this surah calls for. An example of social dynamism, social inclusiveness, action rather than inaction. So
it's we have this like standing joke around here where we have like a club of Mariams. We wanted to start a Mariams club of empowered women, but I think that this surah is really great for that too. So we'll just put them all together and fire it up. Women power, convert power, but individual power. I mean, honestly, like the whole idea of speech, and and it's just shocking that when you say, that this is an example, this surah is an example of how no one was able to pull together the overall meaning, that people find it disjointed. But for us, when you lay it out like this, it's so clear, and it just touches you so deeply, and it just makes you see, yourself with such clarity. So alhamdulillah, may Allah bless you, and may we really internalize these lessons. So we have just a little bit of time. If you guys have any questions you want to send through the chat, if anyone here has any questions. Okay, great, come on up. Have you guys all ordered your copies of the Prophet's Pulpit? Made your list of your friends, you're going to get it too.
Order yourself and then order some extra copies to give away.
Just actually one point of clarification and then one question. The idea of اتخذوا أيمانهم جنة. I was so you were saying, people use their faith as a Jannah, but Ayman means oaths, so I'm wondering, is there like alternative readings of the verse firstly, and then if it's, what would oaths in this context mean exactly? I mean, it's...
Yeah, and actually this is not Ayman or Iman. Even in the traditional tafsir, they'll tell you that it could mean both. It could mean that they are swearing that they are believers, or that they have taken their very behavior as Muslim as a form of Jannah. The Ayman could also mean your belief.
But when we say Ayman belief, is it like in the specific context of these people who, as becoming Muslims, they were essentially, making an oath of like joining a particular community?
Well, okay. They are, yeah, they're, I mean, part of their Ayman is the pledge. The Shahada was a pledge to follow the Prophet ﷺ. But even if we take, for instance, I don't know, this takes too long, then I won't do it, but let's see.
I mean, that answers my question, unless you want to...
I'm just seeing if I can do it quickly. If it takes too long, I won't. But it is, yeah, it's the Amen. It's not necessarily that all of them would sit there and swear that they're loyal, because some of them didn't even swear at all. It is the very fact that they pledge an allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ. They pledged an allegiance to this ummah, but their behavior creates doubt that in fact this pledge is authentic or real. But what number? 16. So.
It's not working. Are you trying to get rid of that page?
No, it's okay. So okay. قرأ جمهور أيمانهم جمع يمين، وهي ما كانوا يحلفون عليه من الكذب بأنهم من المسلمين. فجعلوا هذه الأيمان وقاية وسترة دون دمائهم, so that they are not fought as non-Muslims. كما يجعل المقاتل الجنة وقاية له من أن يصاب بسهم أو رمح. وقرأ إيمانهم بكسرة الهمزة، أي جعلوا تصديقهم جنة من القتل فآمنت ألسنتهم من خوف القتل ولم تؤمن قلوبهم. So the Qur'an is both Iman and Ayman, but I don't think there's much of a difference.
And then on verse 21, كتب الله لأغلبن أنا ورسلي. You mentioned moral victory, and it just brings to mind a lot of different ideas about, I mean, how we can understand victory, because I think many people will be like, well, I'm being a good Muslim and upholding principles, but I keep, experiencing all this loss and etc. But for me, it reminded me of just the idea of living the good life, or like what Aristotle talks about as eudaimonia.
Mhm.
The good life is this process that happiness is not necessarily success and material gain, etc., but it's actually living morally upright life. And I'm wondering if that is that what you're getting at from moral victory.
Yeah, I mean that. Yes, in part, but it's not just that. Like in a lot of the books of tafsir or even books of aqaid, they'll tell you الغلبة تكون بالسيف أو بالحجة. And when you take the idea of الغلبة بالحجة, so it's either they're saying, well, it could be by sword, but it could be also by reason. Well, are they really talking about uh, what do they mean by prevailing by reason? It is not necessarily that. It is not this, the myopic way of saying, well, they prove their correctness by reason, or that they somehow become victorious by reason. But it is that the upholding the truth itself is ghalaba lil haqq. The very fact that you, I mean, of course, I'm not, غلبة في في الدار الآخرة is a foregone thing, that in the hereafter. So we're only talking, but just الدفاع عن الحق or إقامة الحق is غلبة للحق. The very fact that, so in my view, okay, you take someone, um, you take like someone like Salman al-Auda, sitting in a Saudi prison all this time. Or you take someone, the Ahmad Sabia, that poor guy that was a brilliant young man, and he's rotting in an Egyptian prison till now. Can anyone sincerely say that they've been defeated? I mean, the fact that Salman al-Auda is victorious, even though, and the person that jailed him is a defeated person, because his very imprisonment elevates the truth, and so was Ahmad Sabia. So, yes, I mean, there are a lot of similarities between the Aristotelian idea of righteous living as victory, but I even mean it in a less sophisticated sense, that إقامة الحق, just supporting truth, is a غلبة للحق. And I think it is because a lot of times you feel that Muslims want these imperial victories, like an army defeating an army. The very fact that Allah inspires in you the courage to stand for truth, and that your life becomes, so that when you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter, and you say, Allah, I spent most of my life in prison. Like, I think of someone like Ahmad Sabia, who, went and studied, Hebrew and studied Aramaic, and, spent all this time studying, and then just as he's about producing, you know, just finally reaches the point where people can benefit from it. He's grabbed and thrown to prison, and it looks like the Egyptian government is determined to, just because he's upset the Coptic Church, is determined to have him expire in prison. And but I think of him as in the hereafter, saying, Allah, my life stood for a principle. My entire life stood for a principle. Isn't this ghalaba al-haq? For all of us, we will look at him and we say, he is victorious, far more victorious than many of us that lived a very compromised lives or very ambiguous lives.
So true. What is the dhikr for the surah?
It is. Where it is 19.
Okay, great.
أنساهم ذكر الله. The the dhikr of the surah is the more I would spend time. Often I would end up reciting in prayer the entire surah Mujadilah, just because of it's not a very long surah. But the idea of istihwaz al-shaitan, the thing that really Allah opens your heart to, is that I can look at my own life and I can see periods of my life where I can see myself as mustahwaz alayya min ash-shaytan. That all, and I suspect that this is the case for all of us. That it is so easy for shaitan to come and trap you into a lot of vain endeavors, trappings of prestige, of power, of reputation, of all the bells and whistles of existence, and for shaitan in the midst of all of that to make you forget dhikrullah. And dhikrullah is not, you don't stop praying, and you don't stop the ibadah, but Allah is not in your heart because you are engaged in very things that have to do with competing for things in life. And when you supplicate with this for hours, and what starts happening, or what happened with me, is that Allah just then allows your entire life to flash before you. It's like you see the entire, your life from the time you were an adolescent to the age you're in, as if you're watching it, in the, and you become terrified at the loneliness and wahsha, the loneliness and the utter desperation of drifting away from hududullah to the plains of shaitan. That where Allah is, things in life start, attract you for a period, but that's when you start really the entire meaning of Surah Al-Mujadilah, because law itself, like that woman that elicits illegal solution, law itself and Islamic law itself can become a path to istihwaz al-shaytani. You're a great legal mind. You know all the complex legal doctrine, and you have memorized this sharh and that sharh and this mukhtasar and that mukhtasar. You know, but is dhikrullah really in your heart? Are you truly part of Hizbullah? That's I mean, just I'm explaining why this is the dhikr and what the dynamics of the dhikr is with Surah Al-Mujadalah. It, it it re-educates you as to your attitude, the attitude towards law. Law is not about your ability to read Subki's Usul or to present and learn at Sharhan al-Amidi's Usul. Law, that's not what law is about. That's what your ego is about. Law is about finding solutions that bring people closer to Allah, that befriend people to Allah, not alienate people from Allah. All the impressive things you can do, Sharh al-Amidi or Sharh al-Subki or whatever, that's neither here nor there. That's for your, that's if you use that for the right thing, then it's something. But if you use that just so people can say, look how impressive he is, then that's on you, not for you.
But even as a person, not a legal scholar, like this principle.
No, it's
yeah,
and of course I'm just describing my own journey with it, but it applies to everything. You can take it, forget Shuruh al-Subki or Amidi or whatever. You can take it for anything, because even Islamic work, everything, even Islamic work can become an ego trip. And you must be very careful that you're not traversing the path of shaitan. Pay attention to your najwa. Pay attention to what you listen to and what you utter, what you hear and what you ask people to listen to. Because shaitan is in the acts of speech. And the acts of speech could either open spaces for shaitan or make spaces inaccessible to shaitan. That's what the core lesson from Surah Al-Mujadalah. I don't know. It's like I always feel like if Muslims really understood their book, it is the most remarkable text that humanity has ever been given. I mean, maybe that's why Allah had me read all these thousands of books in all these languages and so on. Maybe I read all these thousands of books and for us to be bankrupt with the library that we have, just so that I can see, I can testify that this is like no other text. There is no other text in the universe like this book.
I forgot to ask you at the beginning if you could talk about your journey. You've already talked about your journey with what the content of the surah, but I'm just wondering about like where you were, how like what were your
Subhanallah, Surah Al-Mujadilah. I mean, it was after Surah Al-Nisa. I wasn't sure, I wasn't sure whether I should go in order, a chronology of the way the Quran is organized, or where, and I prayed, and at the back then, what fell in my heart was Surah Al-Mujadilah. And I really wanted to understand, because it struck me when when you're memorizing the surah, when you're, much younger and you're memorizing the surah, it's a surah just opens up with this problem of the heart, and then it moves on. It seems like it just moves on to the hypocrites, the munafiqun. And we have Surah al-Munafiqun. We have another surah that is named the hypocrites. And I just read, and all the, tafsir that I read, or the shuyukh that I had learned from, some even sources tell you, oh, well, it's, so, but why? Why this opening? And this is what had become an obsession for me. I wanted to understand why Surah Al-Mujadilah, why, for instance, this woman with the zihar problem, why when the Quran was organized, that part wasn't attached to Surah Al-Nisa. The Prophet ﷺ could have said, oh, this ayah belongs in Surah Al-Nisa, not here. So that became an obsession. And first you do your homework by reading everything that you can get your hands on, whether published or not published. And then I wrote down a series of questions, and sort of wrote a short outline of what my research, because what texts I needed to go to, whether Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba or Abdul Razzaq, or pursuing certain hadiths with certain isnads, or certain akhbar, or even tracking anything that I could find about this woman in the sources about her life, when she died, when did her husband died, what was her impact in Islamic history. And then after this took, I remember it took quite a few months. It took like 3 months of where I was keeping notes and researching different things and so on. And then came the point that I just, you just do ta'abbud, and you just ask Allah to make the Quran, to open your heart to the Quran, and for the Quran to open its doors to you. And then it mapped out very clearly. Then once I saw it, it became undeniable. It was obvious. And then when I went back and read a lot of the traditions I had read before, again, it was all obvious then, because a lot of the narratives, especially the historical role of Surah Al-Mujadilah, what it was telling people. And we haven't gone into Masjid al-Dirar yet, but why? One of the questions that, okay, so if the Prophet ﷺ knew, they were clearly we could identify them now by name. Hassan Farhan al-Maliki, in a lot of his talks, he mentions by name the same people who were troublemakers. But the Prophet ﷺ never arrested them, never exiled them, never punished them. And I wanted to understand why. If they were such a headache, and they're even described as part of Hizb al-Shaitan, and no acts of violence were even committed against them. No Muslim, for all the traditions we read about how Umar ibn Khattab was a hothead, we don't have a single incident where Umar goes and attacks one of them. We always have these staged reports that, Umar was about to chop his head off, except, then the Prophet stopped him and so on. But nevertheless, these people lived and died, known enemies of the state. And when you learn enough history and you do enough ibadah, what you realize is because this was, yes, they were a huge pain for the Prophet ﷺ. And in fact, they were a huge pain after the Prophet ﷺ died. And they ended up, some of them ended up feeding into the apostasy movement that Abu Bakr had to, and so many of the companions of the Prophet died fighting. But the point is that the Quran was teaching us a lesson. The reason they had to survive and everyone had to suffer their evil is that we learn that the responsibility of speech and the responsibility of moral decisions, we wouldn't have learned this lesson if they were just wiped off the face of the earth. And once you understand that, then it just so many things just open up before your eyes.
And you were saying that you haven't found this interpretation or the ability to pull it all together in the things that you read before that, at least in your awareness.
You know, so alhamdulillah, I mean,
You don't have to admit if you don't want
yeah,
to.
you know how hard it is. I mean, even when you're sitting there talking about my books, you know, I wish you would have told me so I can absent myself from that part of it. If I knew you were going to sit there and talk about, oh, okay, here's this book, it's like, you know, but you know, I try to forget that I'm actually married to you, and I say, okay, this is this crazy, you know, fanatic
No.
woman that I have very little to do with.
He's not good with praise, and I'm like all about cheerleading. So it's this like, that's the mizan. Okay, how are we doing on time? I didn't bring my phone, so I actually don't know what time it is. Okay, so let's just do, I know Brian has one question. So, alhamdulillah, thank you. Okay, so from Brian, assalamu alaikum. Ijma as an institution is often used to silence modern thought and interpretation. What role can ijma play in our age to encourage scholars to pay respect to the tradition before someone tries to contribute intellectually, while not using it to silence new thought?
Yeah, you know, ijma is a claim that, if proven, that shifts the burden of proof, but should never be an irrebuttable burden of proof. So put it simply, first there's the claim of ijma. A claim of ijma has to be proven itself, not assumed. So if you claim ijma, you bear the burden of proof of showing that an ijma actually exists.
For people who don't know what ijma is.
Ijma is consensus. And I will say, you know, of course, you know, there are a huge debate as what exactly counts in an ijma or not. But the thing is that Muslims often use the claims of ijma without even bothering defining the ijma. But even if we take a workable definition, the ijma is the consensus of the overwhelming majority of scholars. So, you know, that even if there is a few dissenting voices here and there, we can still say ijma. Now, once you bear the burden of proof and you actually convince me an ijma exists, all that means is now the burden is upon me to respect this position and to presumptively assume that is correct. If I can see that ijma exists, that means the presumption is that this position is correct unless proven otherwise. So in other words, now I bear the burden of showing that what the consensus believes is actually wrong. It is very dangerous. People don't understand often that there were two types of claims of ijma. In the legal processes, the ijma was a technical concept, and it was often a technical concept like when the Supreme Court in the United States or courts of appeal say it has always been the established doctrine in American law, or it is well known in our constitutional jurisprudence, or what, and it is a claim that everyone takes seriously, but it doesn't mean that it silences the possibility of showing otherwise. In law, it worked as a stabilizing force. Outside law, the way it functioned in theology, were like a lot of social debates. It often was claimed by various groups in political competitions, and it was claimed far more carelessly and was far less disciplined in socio-political conflicts than it was in law. But ijma shifts burdens of proof. It doesn't prove anything conclusively. And it's because it's very dangerous when we, as Brian points out, when we use ijma to, because, I mean, listen, I can't tell you the number of times that, and this is actually very, very recently, I was talking to someone about all the poor souls that Saudi Arabia executed, the 81 I mean, horrendous. And of course you got, well, the ijma is that all the Shia are kuffar, and they're the mere fact that Shia, you could execute them. What type of that is an example of how dangerous the claim of ijma can be. When ijma is actually used to jur'a dima, to claim that you can violate the sanctity of human life, you can declare millions of Muslims to be just simply heretics. Ijma is a critical concept in law because law requires stability, but all it does, it says there is a presumption, burden of proof is upon this side, that side, and if I concede there is an ijma over something, it means I must recognize that now I bear the burden of proof of showing that the position I'm defending, if it's against the ijma, that it is a reasonable and defensible position. That in fact the position should challenge the ijma and maybe invite the ijma to reconsider its stand. We, like a lot of other things, we need to revisit institutions of authoritarianism in our tradition. Because look at the mess that we've created, and this mess is brutal, and it's extremely demoralizing.
Okay, well, I think no one else here had a question, right? Okay, I think we've gone over time. Thank you, everybody.
Remind them Tarawih.
We have Taraweeh tonight.
Glaston.
Don't forget to buy your copy of its Pulpit. And we've done all your Eid gift listing for you. This is your present to every single person you were planning to buy a present for. So simple.
Is the intellectual revolution that you speak about, is it just your invention, or does anyone else actually subscribe to that?
No, there's ijma.
There's a
There
dramatic.
is an ijma on the intellectual revolution?
We're ready for
Okay.
for an intellectual revolution. We're tired of Muslims being at the bottom of the barrel. So we gotta fight back. This is an easy way to fight back. You just buy it and you give it to your friend and say, here we go, people. Let's do it.
Okay, other than the revolutionary craziness,
Yes.
it's the last 10 days of Ramadan. So,
Could be Laylatul Qadr if you assume it could be. It's only on
Grace, I'm
odd
sure,
nights.
is going to be praying for the revolution, and inshallah, she'll pray on Laylatul Qadr, and Allah will answer her prayers. I just have a much more humble point to make. make an effort to increase your ibadat in the last 10 days. Every Ramadan that comes
Inshallah.
is a landmark in life, is a major point in life, and you never know if you will be around in the Ramadan that follows. This is only in Allah's hands. And a wise person always treats the last 10 days of Ramadan as if they're the last 10 days of Ramadan they will experience or they will witness.
Every book you buy, you can tell Allah, look, my intention was to start a revolution, and it'll count extra in the last 10 days, inshallah.
Yes, what she said. Yes.
Okay, you guys have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and inshallah we will hope to see you next week. Oh my gosh, wait, so is Eid next Sunday? Sunday, still.
There's still another weekend of Ramadan.
Oh, okay, fasting.
We have another.
We still have another weekend. Okay, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, we're not done yet. Okay. All right, have a wonderful rest of the weekend. We will see you soon, inshallah. Assalamu
Assalamu
alaikum.